Breaking news overnight, the U.S. retaliates after 2 American soldiers were killed in an Iranian attack on an airbase in Jordan. We'll have the latest from the region as the State Department issues a worldwide travel warning.
And big tech tumbles ahead of a slate of earnings this week from Alphabet, IBM, and Tesla. Chip stocks looking to bounce back after a bruising week.
I don't want to say we're going to win until the game is finished, but go Argentina! And we know what's going to happen. Spain is going to win.
And today's the day Argentina and Spain face off in the World Cup final in New Jersey. Real Madrid center back Antonio Rüdiger joins us live in studio to preview the big game.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. We are coming to you live from Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York. I'm David Gura.
I'm Christina Ruffini with Lisa Mateo. It is Sunday, July 19th. Welcome to our listeners and viewers across all our Bloomberg platforms on radio, TV, streaming, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. And of course, overnight, we've been watching these strikes and retaliatory strikes in the region throughout the Middle East due to the ongoing conflict in Iran, tracking at least 2 U.S. casualties, other injuries at that air base in Jordan this morning. Details are still emerging as to what exactly happened and how those attacks were able to get through, what air defense systems are in place in that area. 7th
straight night of those strikes as led by the U.S. Of course, they've been tit for tat. We've seen retaliatory strikes, as Christina just mentioned a moment ago. Going to dig into all of that in just a moment here, but first, let's get to the headlines with Lisa Mateo. Lisa?
You got it. And U.S. Central Command, they're saying the strikes, which have now ended, they targeted Iranian military, coastal surveillance, and air defense facilities, and missile and drone storage sites. Now, President Trump, he called the death of those 2 service members killed in Jordan, quote, a very sad thing, but he reiterated that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And when asked about Iran's announcement that it was no longer abiding by the memorandum of understanding, Trump replied, I couldn't care less. To the war in Ukraine, where local authorities say 1 person was killed in an overnight Russian attack on Kyiv. Ukraine's foreign minister called it the largest ballistic missile barrage aimed at Kyiv since the start of the war. Another 16 people were wounded. Thousands took to the streets in Kyiv for another day of protests against Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's government reshuffle, including the dismissal of its defense minister. Zelensky also appointed a new prime minister to prepare Ukraine to survive another winter of war. Sergei Koretsky is a technocratic energy executive with no cabinet experience or political ties. Back in this country, hundreds gathered in downtown Portland, Maine to demand ICE agents leave the state after the killing of a Colombian national in nearby Biddeford. Now, this man, he was part of the National Day of Action.
I was down at Biddeford, and I'm here because I care about that. And, who doesn't?
25-year-old Juan Sebastian Guerrero, he was killed in a traffic stop. It was the second use of deadly force by immigration enforcement in less than a week. Well, Republican Representative Ralph Norman is making a run for South Carolina's open Senate seat after the death of Lindsey Graham. The move will set up a potential primary contest with Graham's sister, Darlene, who took over the seat after her brother's passing. In an interview on Fox News on Saturday, Norman explained why he decided to run.
I will be laser focused on passing President Trump's America First, and it starts with the Save America Act. We'll nuke the filibuster, and I will be a vocal vote and a supporter to make this happen. And it's not happening in the Senate right now. That's why I'm doing it.
Other South Carolina Republicans considering a bid include Representative Nancy Mace and Russell Fry, as well as Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evette. That's the winner of the August 11th Republican primary. They will face Democratic Annie Andrews in the general election. David and Christina, over to you.
Lisa, thank you very much. Compressed timetable here. This is happening very quickly, and no doubt will be a hard-fought campaign, but really just playing out over a couple of weeks.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lisa.
All right. We're going to start with that breaking news out of the Middle East and those 2 American service members who have been killed. One is also missing, I should note as well.
All right, joining us now, we have Bloomberg News senior White House correspondent Josh Wingrove and our Middle East reporter Dan Williams. Dan, I want to start with you. CENTCOM is saying the overnight strikes were to swiftly punish Iran for the death of those 2 American service members at that airbase in Jordan. Can you just kind of give us a layout of what we know happened overnight? There's also been some mixed messaging. This morning, there was an alert from the U.S. Embassy in Jordan saying that the airport and some other facilities there had been evacuated due to security concerns, and we now have a terminal headline crossing the terminal saying Jordan is saying that is not true. So we're not quite sure what's going on there, but tell us what else is going on in the region.
Good morning. Yes, there's some mixed messaging from Jordan. No doubt there's a great deal of consternation there. This is a country that really finds itself not just in the line of fire, but the target repeatedly of Iranian strikes since this flare-up dating back several days now. And obviously the site of those American casualties, 2 fatalities, 1 missing, several wounded, bringing the American death toll in this war to 16, and certainly ramping up expectations in the United States, in the administration, that the US response should be severe and may actually be designed to spiral even further. As for where I am right now in Israel, this country, despite having launched the war with the US on February 28th, has been sitting out this resumption of hostilities between Iran and the United States. There may be several reasons for that, and it may soon end. The Americans are now openly deploying refueling jets to Israel. There was some stationed here, but some had been withdrawn or relocated. Latest reports from Israeli media, there could be as many as 100 US refueling jets on their way here now, which suggests something very big is in the offing, and in fact, that Israel could find itself involved one way or the other. As for the overnight strikes, the Americans seem to be hitting more and more inland in Iran and also in the Strait of Hormuz, which obviously is the choke point, is the focus of this latest flare-up. I think historians will look back at this and may even call this the War of Hormuz rather than the Iran war. It would seem that either side, the 2 main parties now waging this war, Iran and the US, want to have the final say as to who does, and more importantly, does not control and call the shots over international traffic in that strategic waterway.
I want to turn to Josh Wingrove in the greater Bedminster area, traveling with the president as he gears up for executive time, which I think is slated to start at 8 o'clock Eastern time. Josh, let me ask you about what we've heard from the president in recent hours. I know News Nation got the president on the phone, and I'll quote here from a piece on News Nation's site. Asked about Iran's announcement that it was no longer abiding by a U.S.-Iran memorandum of understanding, Trump replied, quote, "I couldn't care less," which prompted a response on Twitter from the Supreme Leader, indicating here that the signature of the U.S. president is utterly worthless and devoid of credibility. So we see the back and forth militarily, the back and forth rhetorically, as well. Just picking up on what Dan said a moment ago, that something very big seems to be in the offing here. What do we know of the U.S.'s plans going forward?
You've had radio silence over the weekend, really, other than those brief remarks you just read out from the president. So there is, I guess you could call it a strategic ambiguity publicly in the position that the Americans are taking out. That CENTCOM statement had some phrasing that I think is notable, whether it's a head fake or not, but they talked about holding account the members of the Revolutionary Guard Corps who took on this attack. Trump has in the past distinguished between Iran doing stuff, leadership doing stuff, and individual factions doing stuff. So that phrasing could mean nothing, or it could be them kind of leaving a off ramp if they ever were to want it, to chalk up some of this stuff to sort of unnecessary or fluke kind of actions. But Trump himself was sort of keen to wrap this up. Now he seems keen to let it keep going. We just simply don't know how long the runway on that is going to be. Of course, we've seen relief on gasoline prices here in the U.S. That has been the key political pressure point for the president. As long as that remains the case, I don't expect we'll see a lot of Republican lawmakers in particular speaking out or calling for some kind of return to the table to restore the ceasefire.
Dan, you mentioned the concern about the next phase of the war. I was talking to some folks in the region today. They've been getting a lot of signals from their security folks that this is nowhere near over. And they flagged something that you said you'd seen on Israeli TV last night, that they're so worried about this next wave of attack and what it's going to look like, especially regarding drones, that Israel is considering banning even civilian drones for a prolonged period of time. Is that realistic? And what does that mean for where this could be going?
I think it's going to be a tall order. There is a small but muscular cohort of amateur drone operators in Israel. However, given that the Israelis have bled, their soldiers have suffered and died in many cases in southern Lebanon due to Hezbollah's very effective use of drones of the kind you could buy at high-end toy stores, specifically drones that are operated with fiber optic cables, which basically defy traditional electronic jamming. The Israelis are worried that this could spread elsewhere. There are unconfirmed reports that even in Gaza, despite Hamas being very much on the back foot there, they have been receiving such drones into their very rudimentary arsenal. There are worries it could be in the West Bank as well. And indeed, Syria, which doesn't have open, peaceful contacts with Israel, but nonetheless finds itself on the same side as Israel against what's known as the Iranian Axis, Hezbollah, and the like, announced just 2 days ago that it had stopped on the way in from Iraq a truck full of these drones that were intended for Hezbollah in Lebanon. That just shows the ease with which these small, cheap objects can be transported. They're very effective, very low tech, and very threatening to the Israelis.
I want to play a bit of sound here from Kay Bailey Hutchison. She was, of course, a senator from Texas and then the U.S. ambassador to NATO. And she and I sat down together at the Aspen Security Forum a few days ago. And we talked about kind of the prospects of further negotiations going forward, the difficulty of that in light of what's happened with this memo of understanding. Let's take a listen to what she had to say about how she sees the path forward.
It's a negotiation like we've never had before, at least in my memory, where you negotiate with an adversary that is doing terrible things. You think you have an agreement, and it's not an agreement on the other side. And that has been difficult. I think the U.S. has been patient. We've worked with allied neighbors in the Middle East to get their support, but also to help them, because Iran is turning on its own neighbors. And I think the president's patience is wearing out, that's for sure. And I can tell you Congress's patience is wearing out. And so I think we are going to have to see maybe more bold measures to just finish this job.
Military measures.
It could have to be military measures. And I think the president has shown that he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to kill people. He doesn't want to put our troops in harm's way. But when you can't rely on even a memorandum of understanding, you've got to start looking for other measures that would make a difference.
Josh Woodruff, I want to go to you on this point. So we have a president who, for his entire career, has been a very proud deal maker. And I'm curious sort of how he sees what's happened here, or your sense of how he sees what's happened here, putting his son-in-law, his trusted friend and advisor, in charge of doing this negotiation, and now seeing it fall apart in the way in which it has. Any indication from him of how much frustration he has and what the path forward might be, aside from military action that we've seen in recent days?
And as vice president.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of people wrapping their arms around this thing right now. No, he has not betrayed any of his frustration publicly. I agree with her comment about him losing patience with this, but Trump in the past, that kind of can go two ways, right? That can either be escalation or him kind of, throwing his toys on the ground and walking to another thing for a little while. And we just simply don't know where that is going to land. So I don't want to speculate too much. I think, though, the political question here is tricky for the president. He has repeatedly noted that Iran's Navy is destroyed, that their Air Force is destroyed. He's cast them as sort of completely militarily defeated. So for the average viewer back home, Americans who are sort of tuning in and out in their day-to-day lives, you would forgive them for being confused as to why this is still dragging on and why this is presenting such a thorny situation for the American forces in the region. And so the longer this drags on, I think the more those questions grow. And again, I think the energy prices are going to be a sort of a key driving political factor. Trump is, of course, as every domestic viewer knows, trying to hold on to the House in particular, the Senate as well, of course, in these midterm elections, and trying to defy history and kind of pulling out all the stops to do that. And I think that will remain a big political calculus for him, including whether he has the vice president re-engage, whether he himself re-engages, whether they ramp up strikes, whether they consider some of these reported limited options that we've seen, including, potential targeted boots on the ground scenarios on Carg Island or whatnot. I think all of this is sort of hanging under a complicated political landscape for him.
Dan, adding to the politics, I want to talk about the politics of the region right now, because the State Department has issued this travel warning saying it advises Americans worldwide, and especially in the Middle East, to exercise increased caution. Groups supportive of Iran may target other U.S. interests overseas or locations associated with the United States and or Americans throughout the world. This administration focuses a lot on the military power, but regional allies have tried to ramp up the soft power, the diplomatic power, because it is very hard for the U.S. right now to exercise that in these embassies, which have essentially been on lockdown since this conflict began. Can you talk about the safety of these installations around the region and also civilians? I think about these places like Dubai, like Abu Dhabi, that had this image of being safe, gleaming cities on the hill, and what that's doing for them and for their economies.
I think the sense of safety in those sites, those metropolitan sites, have been very popular, not just for those involved in international finance, but tourism. Confidence has been shaken already during the course of this war. I think there was some surprise, including those countries, that they came so quickly under Iranian retaliatory attacks, including against civilian targets, hotels and the like. This warning would not be especially surprising there. I think those countries have weathered the damage, perhaps trying to keep on top of whatever renewed reputational damage there might be in the wake of this latest US warning. What we're really seeing here is a reference to second-tier, downstream terrorist retaliation, subnational, perhaps international, as a result potentially of Iran running out of traditional upfront military options in the face of a much more powerful US foe and, until recently, Israeli foe as well. It would appear the Americans, perhaps the Israelis too, have intelligence indications that Iran or Iran's supporters worldwide may be preparing to resort to this. That may be part of the reason for the reported evacuation of that southern Jordanian port in the Red Sea, which, by the way, is right across the water from Eilat, Israel's Red Sea port. As you noted, the Jordanian state denied what the US embassy had said about the evacuation of that port and the nearby airport. Nonetheless, it shows that really they're taking no risks here. That could, and in fact it has in the past, been the target of terrorist attack, a mortar attack, I think some 12 or 14 years ago.
Josh Wingrove, very quickly here, set the table for us. What does the rest of this weekend look like for President Trump? He's in New Jersey to hang out at his property, but also to go to this big game scheduled to take place a little later.
Yeah, he's going to. Yeah, happy World Cup final day. He's going to be handing out the trophy here. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney going to also be in attendance. People are watching that to see whether they actually meet Trump. Of course, there's been some tension with the Canadians in particular in the last few days that we over the wildfire smoke. So we'll see. I'm looking out at New Jersey now. The sky looks mercifully, smoke-free by comparison. So that's good, easing fears that the game would have had too much smoke or even, face potential delays or whatnot. The first window to hear from the president is probably after the game, other than whatever remarks he makes during the ceremony. So on all these topics, including Iran, I think we're going to have to wait to the end of the day to maybe hear from him to see if he speaks to some of the reporters traveling with him on the plane. So that is a big Sunday for him.
All right, Josh Wingrove, our senior White House correspondent, and Dan Williams, our Middle East reporter. And Josh got up early and even put on a tie. We appreciate it, buddy.
Well
Thank
done.
you so much.
Coming up here, a big day in UK politics. Andy Burnham about to become the 7th prime minister in the last decade. What's at the top of his agenda as he moves into 10 Downing Street? That's straight ahead on Bloomberg This Weekend, on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. Rescue efforts, they continue in China following a landslide that left 8 people dead, 34 missing in the southwestern city of Chongqing. Now, massive amounts of rocks and soil, they tumbled down a slope on Friday, burying more than 10 residential buildings. 10 people were rescued in the immediate aftermath. The search for more survivors has been hindered by unstable terrain and also the risk of more landslides. Ontario Premier Doug Ford is responding to President Trump's criticism of Canada's wildfire response. The president took to Truth Social on Friday, threatening higher tariffs to deal with the cost of, quote, filthy, polluted air. Ford called the president's rhetoric unacceptable. He suggested dropping lumber tariffs would help clear forests. Ford says that Ontario has 191 active wildfires, with 73 not under control. And poor air quality not affecting today's World Cup final as Argentina defends its title against Spain in New Jersey this afternoon. Now, Argentina looking for its 4th title, Spain battling for its 2nd. Spanish fans celebrating in New York yesterday said they know they may be more Argentina fans at the match, but they're not worried.
We will promise that we'll shout for represent the 47 million of Spanish people that are in the country.
Well, yesterday, England defeated France 6-4 in Miami. England was up 4-0 at the half. They held off a strong comeback from France to win the third-place playoff match. David and Christina will send it over to you. More action.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yep.
Thanks, Youseff. Judging by jerseys, it's going to be Argentina. I've seen so many more Argentina jerseys than I have Spain, but I'll have to see.
Brutus has a jersey, not a Argentina or Spain jersey.
No, Brutus has a U.S. jersey, like the loyal dog that he is.
World Cup, I think, in the next prospects of a successful game.
He's holding out hope.
All right. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. All right, Friday, Andy Burnham became the new leader of the UK's Labour Party after Keir Starmer resigned as Prime Minister last month. Now, tomorrow is going to be a major day of transition for UK leadership. First, Starmer will officially step down. He has to resign to the King. After that, Burnham will be officially invited to meet with King Charles and to form a new government. And then the new Prime Minister will make his way to 10 Downing Street. Joining us now is Bloomberg's UK reporter, James Wilcock. James, I still think of this process as requiring the Queen. I can't quite get it in my head that she's not part of it anymore, but it is now King Charles. Can you just walk us through how this works? It's still kind of odd for Americans to watch a country get a new leader without a general election.
Kissing of hands, I believe.
There's kissing of hands?
Yeah.
James, what's going to happen?
Yeah. I mean, basically, you've got to let the king, and you're right, I do this too. I also use the Queen on air, and I should be using the king. You've got to let him know what's going on. So you have to go to Downing Street and say, hey, this current government's not working out. There's going to be another guy coming in about an hour who is going to pull the next one together. I don't actually know what the king says. It's never normally released to the public. He normally presumably shakes the hands and lets everyone go. And then Keir Starmer will go to Downing Street and he will have set out his speech. He will be gone. Everything will be moved out. Andy Burnham, who is the new Labour leader, will then walk in, set out a speech for government, will walk inside and will quite literally get given the nuclear codes and said by civil servants, tell us who's in your government, because we still don't know. And that is one of the most striking things of this coming administration. Normally, with an election, you have all the shadow cabinet positions. You know who's going to be chancellor. You know who's going to be the Home Secretary. We have nothing. And this is not without the difficult work of a lot of reporters in Bloomberg and UK media trying to say, Andy, who is going to be in this top team? What are they going to do? We know remarkably little. And to your point, it is worth saying that of the past 10 UK prime ministers, 6 have not been elected. 6 have come from within their own parties, so-called like takeover prime ministers. But even so, this one is especially unique because 6 weeks ago, Andy Burnham wasn't even a member of parliament. He was the mayor of Greater Manchester, and it has been kind of a fairy tale ride. He has romped to victory in a southern by-election, has taken over his party by near unanimous consent, and now goes into government. But I will say this is where the problems start. This is where the rubber hits the road, and this is where the choices start to become difficult.
That packing team at Downing Street has been very busy over the last few years.
Very good at what they do. James, I'm curious, as you think about the way that this government might be formed, it strikes me there are it's like a rotating cast of characters. I think of David Lammy and Yvette Cooper, David Miliband for the role of Foreign Secretary. It's a rotating cast of people that we know, you know as well. So when we think of him kind of making his mark or casting a new stamp on this government, how likely is it that he brings in new blood or different individuals than we're accustomed to?
I mean, it's just on the packing. There's a famous story about when Gordon Brown got kicked out in 2010, where there were still mugs from the Labour election victory when the Conservatives went in, because the packing team had cleared everything else out, but the mugs were still there. They hadn't had time in the hours that go through.
Amazing.
It's really tough. I'm going to talk about Ed Miliband. Ed Miliband is the current Energy Secretary. We reported a few weeks back, was the first senior cabinet minister who told Keir Starmer to go. He is one of Burnham's closest backers. He's seen as left-wing. He is by far the most hated politician in the city of London of who could become the next chancellor. We are reporting that Ed Miliband is currently second in the race to become the next chancellor after Shabana Mahmood, the current Home Secretary. That's changed in the past week. I still cannot tell you today who is going to be the Chancellor tomorrow. If I don't know that, and Burnham hasn't made up the decision, and on Friday he openly said he hadn't made the decision yet, we can't decide who the next Home Secretary is, because then if Shabana Mahmood's not leaving that position, we don't know who's moving on. So, David, you're asking the perfect question. I wish I could tell you we had a better answer. Having talked to civil servants in the past week, they also wish they had known about who's the next person's going to be. It sets up a big policy vacuum. It sets up a big leadership vacuum. And it's worth saying that 2 years ago, a very popular Labour leader rode into number 10 Downing Street. We had big questions about whether his plans would hold together. We had big questions about this is Keir Starmer, could keep together a team for 5 years, how that would look. And quite soon, after a very good first couple of weeks, the fiscal reality set in and difficult and popular decisions started to be made. 2 years on, I can kind of copy and paste that analysis to this moment, except this time I don't know who's going to be in charge. It is going to be very interesting. It's going to be very interesting, and but I think the one thing that's different is Andy Burnham is a far more veteran politician than Keir Starmer. He has been the Mayor of Manchester. He has been the Health Secretary back in the 2000s. He was also the Culture Secretary. This is someone who knows what he's doing and does have a very clear amount of experience. The question is there really a plan, and has he made these decisions, and how is it all going to go out? But what we do know is he's going to go out guns blazing next week. We are going to get a raft of policy announcements, a raft of big picture thinking as he tries to reset the agenda.
James, it seems like some of those have already been announced. It's interesting to me you don't know who the cabinet is going to be, but you've already heard from him on a couple policies. He's going to reverse this new digital ID law that was supposed to go into place that was a Keir Starmer policy. Talk us through that. And then something about possibly nationalizing or doing something that looks like nationalizing a London water utility.
Yeah, exactly. He's going to scrap digital ID. This was a Starmer policy. It's going to cost around £600 million. It was seen as a big thing on the centre of the left of the Labour Party, and so therefore scrapping it is a signal that Andy Burnham is kind of moving away from Starmer. He's going to potentially announce new drilling in the North Sea as well. And also, like you said, Thames Water has a very difficult history, right? It is in debt to the tune of about 18 billion. It is looking to raise its bills on consumers by something like 50% over the next 5 years. And it has been kind of a test case for a few years now about, will the creditors get a haircut? Will it go into nationalisation? That's not the sort of difficult bit. I'll be fascinated to see when he announces this, what does he think about the wider water sector? Andy Burnham has talked about wanting to have far more public control of utilities. So is that just taking Thames Water into public ownership, or is it the wider water sector into public ownership? Is it going to be more of a regulator? So to your point, I know we can talk about this one company, the largest one in the UK for water utility, sure, big deal. What is the wider rubric going to look like? What's that going to mean for other utilities? What's that going to mean for the regulator? These are big decisions, and these are just the ones we know he's going to announce. I've got a laundry list as long as my arm of defence spending, social care, which we hear we might get some next week on. What's going to happen in the budget around tax? Are we going to get big decisions? The reason why we have all these problems in the UK is there are very clear, well-known policy problems that the government can fix, but they involve difficult political trade-offs and often quite a lot of time as well. People do know these things, politicians do know these things, but the story of the past 2 years has been Keir Starmer being unable to find the will to take these decisions, especially on welfare. It's one where he lost the big flagship sort of vote of his career that in many ways people say paved the way for him leaving office. The question is, can Andy Burnham do different? He is very popular. I can't understress how popular Andy Burnham currently is, but what politically is going to come in the next week, it's going to be fascinating. This is the big moment for him to make his mark, and we don't yet know everything he's going to do.
James, always good to catch up with you. I'll have you back. We want to talk about the sartorial choices of the future prime minister as well. I know that's a hot button issue across the country.
It's giving cool dad energy. Exactly.
A lot of cool dad energy. James Wilcock, thank you very much. Always good to get your perspective on UK politics, especially at this pivotal moment.
You got perfect question from James. I feel like
I may have noted that.
I didn't do quite as well.
I may have noted that on my sheet. Do keep track of these things.
All right. The world feared that the Iran war's disruption of the Strait of Hormuz was going to trigger these historically high oil prices, but that hasn't really happened yet. And the reason could hint at the rewiring of energy flows globally.
Bloomberg Regionals looked at why that is.
Sometimes it's best to expect the unexpected.
When the Straits of Hormuz first closed, everyone was in a panic, and it was the biggest crisis that many of us have seen in this generation.
There are thousands of vessels that are stuck.
Ships are still getting attacked.
They said they control the strait. They do not.
We heard from the International Energy Agency that this is the biggest oil supply crisis ever seen.
It is in the world's largest oil-producing region.
The Strait of Hormuz is responsible for 20 to 25% of the world's oil as well as gas seaborne trade.
So we're talking about 20 million barrels per day.
It also meant that a lot of food supplies, fertilizers, and other essential commodities were stuck.
Ever since the Iranian Revolution in the 70s, the idea that Hormuz has been important has been known.
Through the Strait of Hormuz.
But it's always been a back burner issue.
Oil prices and shortages were expected to soar.
There is worry in the market that there is no end in sight.
That knock-on effect really is being felt.
People were really wondering how the world would cope with such a disruption.
Many of the banks were talking $150 a barrel, $200 a barrel.
But then, it didn't happen.
Markets barely blinked at some of the challenging headlines coming from the Middle East.
The market has been pretty resilient.
Although we did see prices top $126 a barrel, many of those worst fears were never materialized.
We saw the market adjust to the crisis in somewhat surprising ways. Price response actually shows how resilient markets can be.
So how was the biggest energy crisis in a generation so easily swallowed? And does this ability to cope mean the world has reached peak Hormuz?
Really interesting things happening with the oil markets overnight.
You want to talk about the crack spread?
We have to call it something other than that.
No, this is a technical term.
This is the price. This is the difference
Tell
between the price.
Tell me what it is. You want to define it?
You define it.
No. I think if you do it.
No, it's the difference between the price of what you're paying for the commodity and what you're paying at the pump.
Right, the refined products and the crude oil price, and it's something clearly that's rankled the president quite a bit. I mean, we've heard him threaten gas companies with suits saying that they're inflating their prices, but really it's this issue of global refinement capacity. Yes, in the Middle East, but of course in Ukraine
and now Russia as well.
Yeah.
So we're gonna talk more about that next week. We've got some good guests that we're looking at for you guys. But some of the biggest airline executives will face questions this week about the rising price of pressure as the Iran war heats back up. We're gonna have a preview of that coming up straight ahead on Bloomberg this weekend. Stick with us.
Thanks for joining us live on Bloomberg This Week, and I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. Influencer brothers Andrew and Tristan Tate have been arrested in Miami. Prosecutors in the UK, they're seeking their extradition on rape and sex trafficking allegations from 2010 to 2017 in an area just north of London where they grew up. The brothers are expected to appear in Miami federal court early next week. Their lawyers say they deny the allegations. A Cuban dissident and artist has been freed by Havana after 5 years. Luis Manuel Otero Alcantara, he arrived in Miami. It was in an unusual prisoner release by the island's authorities. Now, this comes as Cuba faces an economic pressure campaign by President Donald Trump's administration. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he welcomed Alcantara's arrival, also asked for the immediate release of what he called more than 700 unjustly detained political prisoners held by the government in Havana. Lettuce recalls tied to cyclosporiasis. Oh boy, that's a tough one. It continues to spread. Now select Walmart locations have removed 4 bagged iceberg lettuce salad products manufactured by Taylor Farms. Now the retailer said they pulled the items which are sold under its Market Store brand. As a precaution, there have been no confirmed illnesses that was tied to those products. And the final round of the British Open underway at the Royal Brickdale Golf Club in Southport, England. At the top of the leaderboard is Sam Burns at 10 under par, followed by Ryan Fox and Kim Si-woo, both at 8 under par. David, Christina, cyclosporosis.
Yes, I've learned the term.
Nailed it.
I was terrified. We are playing pointed now that you're back. I was terrified this morning that you were going to make us write that out and count spelling.
Oh.
But
she would never reveal that.
For pointed. For pointed. I'm watching her face, seeing if I need to study. I would never. All right. Thank you, I think, Lisa.
You got it.
Picking up on that, though, this is still a growing issue out in Colorado. They're talking about this parasite as well, and people were avoiding ordering salads. Like, I think there was a lot of fear, even as they've kind of noted that it came from, it was
also interesting. Well, it's the Taco Bell lettuce, but when you looked at the different places you could get it, it was the same supplier for all of from Walmart to Whole Foods. You know what I mean? This is like you're getting a different price, but people online were saying, are we really getting a different product if this is the same supplier for all this stuff? You a big salad fan in the Gura household?
Yeah, I try to eat salad. It's a hard thing to foist on my children.
Salad?
Not willingly. If you
throw some warm grains on
ranch dressing, that's helpful. Lisa, thank you very much. Appreciate that. All right, tomorrow, top aviation leaders are going to be in the United Kingdom at the Farnborough International Airshow, where they're going to discuss rising fuel prices, geopolitical instability, and global supply chain issues, among many other topics.
Bloomberg's managing editor for space and aviation, Benedict Campbell, will also be there, and he is with us now. All right. What is this thing? Because it's a really big deal, and I admit I really hadn't heard about it, but it's been going on for a very long time. And in fact, Andy Burnham, who we just talked about, is going to be the first British prime minister not to attend in quite a few decades, but he's a little busy. He is a little busy. He doesn't have to get his new job. So tell us what this is, why we care, and what we should be on the lookout for.
Sure. I mean, you'll be forgiven not to know what Farnborough is or where it is. It's south of London. It's really in the middle of nowhere. It's a small airfield, but this is one of the big annual air shows that takes place every year. It alternates with Paris, so it's Paris one year, slightly more glamorous, and then Farnborough this year. And what it is essentially a big sort of conclave of global aviation, space, and defense. So you'll have companies like Boeing, like Airbus, like Honeywell, GE. They're all going to be there. They're going to show off their kit. The main executives will be there. And crucially for us, for Bloomberg, who follow the money, it'll be about what kind of deals get closed. Because this is not just a show to present things, it's also a show to get deals done. So over the past couple of days and into the next couple of days, we'll be chasing those deals. Who buys what? Who's ordering which aircraft? It's always the back and forth between Airbus and Boeing. So that's going to be a main component of what we'll be doing. It sort of kicks off today with a couple of pre-meetings here in London, where I am right now, and then Farnborough out in the field as of tomorrow, Tuesday, and a bit of Wednesday.
Benny, I know of this event because at the end you get these headlines that Boeing has clinched X amount of deals or Airbus has. Right. I'm curious how the flavor of this gathering is different. I know there's been so much focus on the future of weapons and war, the advent of AI and what that means for the aviation industry and for the defense industry as well. Are we talking principally about a conference that's focused on passenger aircraft, or is it a much wider spread of aviation than that?
It's the latter. I think the headlines are always on the sort of the big impressive kit, like, the Boeing 737 or the Airbus 350 or whatever it might be, that, the kind of planes that people have seen, have flown on and so on. But it is increasingly and also a display of military kit. There'll be fighter jets on display. There'll be drones on display. And as you said, it has taken more of a flavor of a defense show over the past couple of years. That's always existed, but it's always been a little bit of a niche issue. But over the past couple of years, obviously that's become far more important. So we'll be looking out for what will be on display, what kind of deals might happen, how is artificial intelligence shaping the way that we look at future conflict, the role of drones and so on. Players that a couple of years ago wouldn't have really participated in this event are now really big, like Ukraine, which is sort of the ground zero, should we say, for the sort of the next generation of warfare. That's going to be something that people will be discussing, the European rearmament efforts and how those are going. So lots of military components happening there. But again, a lot of the headlines tend to be on the civil side, what Airbus is doing, what Boeing is doing. So those two things will keep us busy.
And speaking of those two, this is going to be the first appearance at this conference for Boeing CEO Kelly Ortberg. What does he need to do here? Boeing is in an interesting position. It's seeing increasing competition from Airbus, and it also has American politics that are kind of complicating where it can sell, who it can sell to. The deal that comes to mind is this deal President Trump allegedly struck for China to order some of these Boeing aircrafts. And now this week we had this big press conference where the president accused the Chinese of election malfeasance. Does that factor in when making these orders? Just because you say someone's going to order 7 airplanes, until they actually get that done and delivered, it doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Yeah, so, sorry. It's never far. The politics are never far away. It's always a big component of what goes on at the show. And for Boeing in particular, as you said, it's really important how they sort of strike the balance. President Trump is obviously an important factor. He's a salesperson for Boeing, but it can also go the other way. So with China, we saw that if he doesn't get the tone right, or if he accuses them of something, China can hit back. So for Kelly Ortberg, the Boeing CEO, this will be a very important sort of test case, how he strikes that balance. And it's his first show, as you said. He's been in the job for a while, but last year, Boeing basically sort of got out of the show because they had the crash of the 787 a couple of days before that, and they decided this is not the right moment to be at the show and to sort of tout their sort of products. So this is really the first time that he's going to be there, that he's going to sort of present his products, present his vision, shall we say, and also talk politics to some degree. That will certainly be a part of it.
Benny, before we let you go, let me play an exchange that Lisa Abramowitz, our colleague, had with Ed Bastian, the CEO of Delta, on the issue of oil prices and rising fuel prices. Let's take a listen to what they had to say.
If you look at post-COVID, airfares are about 10 to 15% below where inflation has been. So I think there's still significant room.
So if oil prices go further, you think that airfare prices could go higher without causing just demand destruction?
I think so. We just saw it in the quarter.
Got about a minute left here, Benny, but I'm just curious if, yes, we're focusing on all of the gear and the kit that we're going to see this week, how much of the conversation is going to center just on this particular kind of pressure these companies are facing when it comes to fuel prices?
So one thing that airlines will want to do is buy new aircraft, because as we just heard from Ed Bastian, fuel efficiency is key, and buying aircraft that are more fuel efficient, so that's important. So that factors into sort of where they are going. But for the passenger side, again, like how far can fuel prices go? How much can they, and as a result, how high can ticket prices go? That's going to be a conversation here. Sort of, have we reached sort of peak fuel cost? And as a result, have we reached sort of the peak of what a ticket price can cost? Ed Bastian seems to think we can go higher. The demand is there, the demand picture, and particularly on the front of the plane. So we might see some growth there still. Not great for the passengers, but good for the airline's bottom line.
All right, Benedict Campbell, thank you so much for making time. I know you've got a lot to do, but it was very nice speaking with you. We appreciate seeing you again.
Yeah, it's a busy week for him as this conference gets underway. Tomorrow at the Farnborough Airshow, Bloomberg's Sky Johnson is going to speak live with Boeing CEO Kelly Ortberg. You can watch and listen to that at 4:10 a.m. Wall Street time. More humane hour in London, 9:10 a.m. You can see that on Bloomberg Television and listen to it on Bloomberg Radio.
I think I'll be watching that
there you go.
On delay.
Yes.
Okay. But I definitely will watch it. It's going to be great. All right, when we come back, it is Lisa with BT Dubs and one story that will really make your skin crawl.
You can explore live streaming news and interviews, all our Bloomberg TV shows, documentaries, reporting, and analysis, all in one place. Bloomberg.com/videos.
Why would you say that? All right. You don't want to know. Trust me.
No.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend, or BT Dubs. I'm not fighting with you about this today. No. BT Dubs. Some stories you might have missed throughout the week. I'm Christina Ruffini. That's David Gura. Yes. Lisa Mateo, what you got for us?
Okay, so you know how on LinkedIn you can kind of give testimonials for people?
Yes.
Okay, so now dating apps.
I think they are.
Dating apps are trying something. Okay, so this is from Bloomberg. Hinge daters will be able to show testimonials from friends.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so the Hinge dating app is introducing, it's called Friends Take.
Friends Take.
So it lets daters kind of recruit people they know to leave testimonials on their profiles, right? So if your mom wants to say you're a good person, she can write
like a red
testimonial.
flag, Lisa. I don't know.
Agreed.
Yes.
Agreed.
Yeah.
She can write a testimonial. So it's meant to, it's like your wingman. Think about it. Like someone who's propping you up to get you out there in the Hinge dating world. But a lot of other, the dating app companies like Bumble, they've been working to kind of, Gen Z has been declining, so they're trying to do something to bring them
back into the pool.
So you need that wingman.
Get that
First
wingman.
Of all,
oh boy.
I would like to say,
clear the clock.
My friends are of zero help in my dating life, and I'm looking at y'all in the control room as well.
Wow.
I don't think, when you look at those LinkedIn endorsements, it's always like the most random people who leave them, and I feel like that would be the same with the dating app. It would be like somebody you went to middle school with who would be like, yeah, she let me gum once. She's cool. Go out with her.
And now with AI, I feel like they'll be even better, right? I feel like the AI written ones on LinkedIn are...
Really? And how do you know they're real? You can have bots endorse you.
Yeah, true. I still think the mom thing is great. If
Lisa,
my mom
on behalf of your children, do not do this.
Just weigh in, vouch for them.
On behalf of your adult children, do not do this.
Who's soliciting it? You solicit them yourself? You say like, hey, Lisa?
You can, yes. Just like
all right. But could they also just do it without me asking?
Or they get... See, that I'm not sure, because that would be dangerous. Because what if it was like a bad one?
Well, yeah.
That would kill your dating
it's like
profile.
Now, I would support a Yelp.
It's like a hotel or a restaurant. Yeah, Yelp-style rating.
I would support a Yelp system.
Oh, you would?
For, no, that
You'd
would,
like a star rating?
I mean, I would, but it would be too much drama. But that would be
not
helpful.
5 stars?
There is a website called Are We Dating the Same Man? Where you can go on and...
There is?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We're going to move on from that. But.
Okay, let's move on.
No, I think we
Here we
should
go.
roll on that,
That's a whole nother segment for another day.
Yes.
Okay, you remember 99 bottles of beer on the wall,
Are we dating
okay?
the same man?
I'll talk to you in the commercial. Move on. David, focus right here, here. Okay. Remember 99 bottles of beer. Here we go. 1 million beers. Okay, so this is the Wall Street Journal. Strangers are uniting for one goal: to drink 1 million beers.
Wow.
So this is like a WhatsApp group. Yeah, it's a WhatsApp group, so it's continuing.
Okay.
Like, so every time they log a beer, they have to log it, and so it continues on.
Yeah.
But they already capped out of their 1,000 participants in WhatsApp, because I guess you can only have so many in a group.
Yeah.
But they should reach 1 million by 2034.
1 million. By
1 million. So every time they log a beer, the average is about, I think some of them drinking about 4 beers a day. That's quite a lot.
So it's a good amount
healthy
of beer.
That's a lot of beer.
Yes.
That was a few participants.
Yeah.
But it really spiked, with the World Cup and everything like that. So they're saying that this group kind of, it's a good way for them to get together, and they all meet each other on this
WhatsApp group,
thing,
yeah.
And they're drinking beers.
Take a photo of your beer and post it.
Yes.
Okay.
That's how it works.
I guess it would attract the beer enthusiast who might be inclined to have 4 beers per day.
In a day. It's a lot.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough.
But hey, why not?
Maybe it's the pony beers you mentioned in weeks past.
No, not the tiny ones.
No.
It could be the tiny ones, but hey, who knows?
All right.
Okay.
Very cool.
How about this? Okay, when you go shopping, do you get an excitement, you're like, ooh, yay, dopamine in the brain? No, not. Yeah, I don't either. I get
I usually get annoyed and
I get that I'm spending too much money
and stressed out on spending money.
Yes.
Yeah, correct.
This one's from the Washington Post. Okay, these dopamine sites deliver the thrill of shopping without the cost. Okay, I haven't. So here we go. It's a new form retail therapy. So developers in South Korea, they created dopamine websites. So they basically simulate online shopping without the cost.
The food one cracks me up.
So you can allow users, you can buy items, but they're never going to arrive.
Buy items.
Yeah, because it wants you to feel
good. You just want
to
fill that cart.
Yeah, fill the cart. It makes you feel good.
Does it?
It doesn't make me feel good. I don't know about you.
I know.
But I play this game anyway where I fill the cart, go, you don't need to buy that, and delete it. So I guess that's the same.
It's the same thing.
Principle, but.
So I guess you get the excitement. It never comes, but it never arrives.
You never get dinged on your bank account.
I can understand it with bigger items like clothing or airline tickets or something, but foods, we all get that excited about ordering food that we want to replicate that process?
I don't know. I don't order food. I don't do the DoorDash.
She's just reading the stories here.
I don't.
Come on. Lisa's not going to defend it.
I'm just telling you the story. I don't agree with it.
She's the messenger. She's delivering the news. BT Dubs.
We need to switch seats today. I'm telling you.
But the thing is, you don't get the charge. Okay, so you get the dopamine little.
It's a psychic charge.
Without
it's not
the charge.
an actual charge.
Okay.
But do you get the dopamine if you don't know it's real?
Because it's faking out in your brain.
All right.
I don't know.
All right, we got one more.
I think
we got one more.
Here we go. Okay, this was from Bloomberg Weekend. This one's, human skin is the weirdest new ingredient in the K-beauty boom. Oh, yes it is. Okay, so it's a skin booster treatment derived from donated human tissue.
Okay.
Popular in Seoul's beauty clinics. Okay, so it's called, one doctor says it's made from dead people. So for those of you who are watching on TV, you can actually see what's being done.
It would be weirder if it were from live people.
Yeah.
Just want to posit.
But that is true. It's one of them is called Return to Your 20s. But you inject the skin tissue with all the cells that are stripped out into a patient's face and neck. So it's apparently supposed to get rid of those fine lines and tighten up those pores. But
they have Botox for that. It's fine.
Wow.
But this is a little different. I don't know the price of it compared to Botox. Maybe that's an issue, but I don't know.
We'll get your friend Daniel Day Kim
popular.
back on the show. Maybe it's in the second season.
I was going to say, he did a lot of South Korean beauty treatments in his documentary.
The snails were gross enough for me.
That's,
he didn't do the dead skin.
At least is organic. I have enough dead skin on my face. I don't even Aren't we trying to alive up the skin? I don't know how cadaver is going to help with that.
All right.
Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa. BTW, Lisa.
I'm not thanking you, Lisa, today. That was...
We're coming up on 8 a.m. in New York.
Stick with us. The next hour of Bloomberg This Weekend starts right now.
Crazy.
Breaking news overnight, the U.S. retaliates after 2 American soldiers were killed in an Iranian attack on an airbase in Jordan. We'll have the latest from the region as the State Department issues a worldwide travel warning.
And big tech tumbles ahead of a slate of earnings this week from Alphabet, IBM, and Tesla. Chip stocks looking to bounce back after a bruising week.
I don't want to say we're going to win until the game is finished, but go Argentina! And we know what's going to happen. Spain is going to win.
And today's the day Argentina and Spain face off in the World Cup final in New Jersey. Real Madrid center back Antonio Rüdiger joins us live in studio to preview the big game. Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. It is 8 a.m. in New York. We're coming to you live from Bloomberg's world headquarters in Manhattan. I'm Christina Ruffini.
I'm David Gura alongside Lisa Mateo, bringing you the latest breaking news, reporting, and analysis live this morning and every Saturday and Sunday from 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock Eastern Time. Tracking events out of the Middle East, these tit-for-tat strikes, and indeed we're seeing a lot of damage in Kuwait, Jordan, other nations throughout the region this morning.
And just a lot of stress and uncertainty, mixed signals about what's going on as all these different installations. You know, it's hard to get good information when the diplomats who would give you the information are not available because they are trying to protect themselves or their facilities and just trying to get an assessment of what's happened and what could be coming next, what the next phase of this war looks like, both kinetically and politically, as it's still unclear how, if, and when these two sides get back to the negotiating table. 2
service members killed, we learned overnight as well, hoping for more detail on what happened in Jordan as the day unfolds. Let's get to the headlines first here with Lisa Mateo. Lisa?
You got it. And President Donald Trump telling News Nation that the death of those 2 service members killed in Jordan was, quote, a very sad thing, but reiterated that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Friday's strike also left 4 troops wounded, 1 missing. The total U.S. death toll now stands at 16. And now Jordanian authorities, they're evacuating the airport and seaport in the southern region of the country due to, quote, a specific and credible threat. That's according to the U.S. Embassy in Amman. Now, they also advise Americans to avoid traveling either to the airport or to the seaport. To the war in Ukraine, where local authorities say 1 person was killed in an overnight Russian attack on Kyiv. Ukraine's foreign minister called the largest ballistic missile barrage aimed at Kyiv since the start of the war. Another 16 people, they were wounded. Thousands took to the streets in Kyiv for another day of protests against Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's government reshuffle, including the dismissal of its defense minister. Zelensky also appointed a new prime minister to prepare Ukraine to survive another winter of war. Sergei Kurgetsky, he is an energy executive with no cabinet experience or political ties. And back in this country, hundreds gathered in downtown Portland, Maine to demand ICE agents leave the state after killing of a Colombian national in nearby Biddeford. This woman was part of the National Day of Action.
It's horrific when it happens anywhere, but it's extra horrific when it happens in your community.
25-year-old Juan Sebastian Guerrero, he was killed in a traffic stop. It was the second use of deadly force by immigration enforcement in less than a week. Rescue efforts, they continue in China following a landslide that left 8 people dead, 34 missing in the southwestern city of Chongqing. Massive amounts of rocks and soil, they tumbled down a slope on Friday, burying more than 10 residential buildings. 10 people were rescued in the immediate aftermath. The search for more survivors, it has been hindered by unstable terrain and also the risk of more landslides. And floodwaters in south central Texas have begun to recede, but communities continue to recover. About 30 inches of rain fell over the past few days. 2 people were killed when their vehicles were swept away. Texas Governor Greg Abbott, he's enforcing people to donate to the Rebuild Texas Fund. David and Christina.
Lisa, thank you very much.
Thanks, Lisa.
Terrible weather here yesterday as well. I don't mean to draw the exact parallel, but incredible flash flooding.
No, it was flooding all over the city. It was pretty bad. I have a friend whose kids were at one of those camps last summer in Texas. They were okay, but it's very dramatic for the whole family. So hoping everybody's doing okay down there.
All right. We are learning more this morning about the Iranian missile strike on a U.S. base in Jordan that killed 2 American service members, wounded several more. 1 person still missing, according to U.S. Central Command.
Joining us now, Nancy Youseff, national security and defense writer for The Atlantic, and ABC News State Department reporter Shannon Kingston. Good morning to you both. Nancy, I want to start start with you because one of the things we're seeing this morning is the Wall Street Journal is reporting that Iran has adapted to U.S. defenses. It's firing these missiles that travel at extremely high speeds and can maneuver, as they streak towards the Earth. According to U.S. officials, Iran's ability to hit sensitive targets has also raised concern that the regime is getting targeting help from China or Russia. What is your take on this idea that they might be getting some targeting help from Russia or China, and also this new strategy we're seeing? They also seem to be using some of those cheaper weapons first to kind of overwhelm the defense systems, and then are being a little more successful with some of their strikes where they're trying to hit.
Well, we saw an unverified video from the New York Times of the strike in Jordan, and what you notice is that there doesn't seem to be any intercept of that missile as it's headed towards the base. So it certainly suggests that the Iranians are adapting in terms of how they are targeting U.S. interests and assets across the region. And it's a troubling development in that as long as this war goes on, I think it's inevitable that adversaries learn how to adapt to U.S. defenses. It raises the risks for U.S. troops and for U.S. basing around the region, and creates another reason for urgency in terms of finding some resolution for this. What we're seeing the Iranians do is tries to raise the costs of the U.S. presence in the region, not only for the United States, but for its allies. And I think adapting to U.S. defenses is one way that they're trying to do that.
Shannon, Kingston, get us up to speed on what we know of the ramifications of the attacks that we've seen in recent hours here. As Christina mentioned just a few minutes ago, there's kind of mixed messaging surrounding what's happening with the airport in Jordan. There have been calls on U.S. personnel in the region to be locked down or have to evacuate. Your sense of what's happening across the Middle East as a result of what we saw over the last 24 hours?
Right, I think we're still in a little bit of a fog of war kind of situation here. Jordan has emerged, if not a new theater in this conflict, certainly a new focal point, and it does seem like Iran's ability to figure its way around U.S. air defense systems is factoring in pretty heavily here. And of course, there's the fear among U.S. officials that Iran is sharing information, intelligence with China, with Russia, other adversaries. So it just shows how this all couples together. And a point that Christina has raised is that U.S. diplomatic presence in the region has been greatly diminished throughout the course of this conflict. So just getting information out to U.S. citizens in the region, very, very difficult right now. And we did see the State Department issue a worldwide caution alert, basically telling Americans and civilians everywhere across the Middle East to be careful, but without help from the U.S., without help from diplomats, there's really only so much that Americans can do in that region.
Nancy, can you talk to us about what the U.S. presence is in Jordan? Obviously, there's diplomatic facilities, there are several military installations, and do we know what exactly they were going after, or is it just that they are going after any facility that is associated with the U.S.?
So you're right. The United States has a very robust presence in Jordan because of the strong relationship between the United States and Jordan. Like other countries in the region, I think Jordan is among those that saw a U.S. presence in its country as a form of deterrence against attacks. But what we've seen throughout this war in Iran is that instead, the Iranians are targeting countries that have allowed the United States to have a basing presence in their country, to say that actually that very thing that you thought would provide you a defense is in fact a risk to your own security. It's why we're seeing Gulf states being targeted. As you noted, Kuwait was struck overnight, also a country that has U.S. basing. And so the military presence allows for the United States to project forward and have bases closer to the region and project its presence throughout the world. It had, up until this point, allowed Gulf nations and Arab nations to have a form of deterrence in their countries by having the U.S. presence. But what this war has done is sort of upended those suppositions that U.S. basing equals security. What the Iranians are saying is that actually it creates more threats for those countries.
Nancy, I want to ask you sort of where we are in the trajectory of this, where we were having a conversation yesterday that it seems like these strikes are now a daily occurrence, U.S.-led strikes, and then kind of the retaliatory strikes from the Iranians. Are we back to where we were in March, say? Are we getting close to that? I'm just curious how you see the trajectory of this playing out.
We certainly are getting closer. We're seeing Gulf nations being hit. We're seeing infrastructure being hit. We're not seeing strikes in Tehran, but we are seeing day by day increased hostilities, increased targeting further into Iran, further expanded into Gulf nations by the Iranians in response. I think both the U.S. and the Iranians are trying to raise the cost for the other. The Iranians are trying to say the United States and its allies that not giving the Iranians control over the strait, not giving them the promised sanction and economic relief is too costly. And the United States is trying to say to Iran, trying to hold on to control of the Strait of Hormuz is too costly, that the U.S. will not only go after the assets that it uses to control the strait, but after its infrastructure inside the country. I think the challenge is, I don't know that these strikes are changing either side's opinion, but rather further entrenching them into their positions. And over the weekend, we not only saw the tragic loss of those U.S. troops, but we heard the Iranians say that they're walking away from the memorandum of understanding. And so the diplomatic track that would be used to bring these temperatures down has essentially been eroded because the Iranians are saying they're not willing to come to the negotiation table. So we're seeing a rise up the escalation ladder by both sides, but neither side can actually control where those escalations are going to lead to.
Shannon, and we also have some escalating rhetoric a bit from the president this morning. I know you've literally been on with us, so I'm not sure if you've seen it, but we just have a new Truth Social post where the president says Republicans should add Iran to the Russian sanctions bill. That's what Lindsey, meaning Lindsey Graham, wanted to do and was going to happen. Important, all caps with 3 exclamation points. We do want to talk to you both about Ukraine and Russia, but before we get there, can you kind of remind us what the status is with Iran sanctions and if this is likely to do anything to get Iran back to the negotiating table or if it could have the opposite effect?
Well, Iran is one of the most heavily sanctioned countries in the world, of course. They did get a temporary reprieve under that memorandum of understanding where they were able to sell oil on the open market very briefly, but by recent estimates, they were able to profit in the billions from that. But quickly, once things started going south, we did see the U.S. act to reimpose all financial restrictions. And I think when it comes to President Trump's thinking right now, even though we saw promises from the Pentagon that revenge for the attack that killed those 2 American service members would be swift and severe, when we look at the actual strikes that took place in Iran overnight, the scope, the scale, not particularly dramatic, kind of the same as what we've seen over the course of the last week. So the question comes down to, is this him showing restraint, or is this more of a strategic reset? Because even though Trump has been very hesitant about returning to an all-out war, he's also been surging air resources to the region. So it is very possible that the ceiling for this escalation, we are nowhere close to hitting it.
Nancy Youseff, as we move to Ukraine, let me stick with this sanctions bill that's being debated still in the U.S. Senate. My understanding is you have secondary sanctions and secondary tariffs as well. And something I'm keen to ask Senator Jeanne Shaheen when she joins us in the next hour is, does this president have the appetite to impose the tariffs that would be called for by that legislation? So he could effectively, as I understand this piece of legislation, impose 100% sanctions on countries that buy Russian oil, the top 5 countries that buy Russian oil and gas. What is your sense of that? Again, as he talks about Senator Graham's legacy, the importance of this bill, does he evince the readiness to actually follow through on what this law would let him do?
I think we have seen an increased shift in the president's position as the Ukrainians have made advances on the battlefield, that he has sort of embraced the Ukrainian position more as they've had more wins. Now, whether that extends to sanctions, I think remains to be seen. But between that and now reports that the Russians might be helping the Iranians and their targeting, I think we're seeing more and more incentive for the president to move towards this direction. It's hard to say with any certainty because his position on Russia has oscillated back and forth. But over the last month, I would say we have seen a president that has celebrated Ukraine's battlefield wins by taking more and more positions towards them. He's been more open to providing weapons and other support for Ukraine that he didn't have the position for just a few months ago, when it seemed that the Ukrainians were taking really heavy hits from Russia.
And now Russia, you're seeing, for our TV viewers, you're seeing some video that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky tweeted out earlier this week of some of those Ukrainian hits inside Russia, huge plumes of smoke rising from different facilities. Shannon, I want to ask you, because there were a lot of sanctions put on Russia at the start of this conflict. They were kicked off the SWIFT system. There were lots of measures taken. It didn't really make as much of an impact as it was expected. And that's a whole complicated thing about how the Russian system works and how much stuff is controlled by the government and how they're able to shift funds around. We are starting to see, however, regular people, regular everyday people, and oligarchs get impacted by these strikes, by what's happening with oil. They're starting to see some shakes in the economy. It's an interesting time to talk about further sanctions on Russia. Could they have an impact now where they haven't had as big an impact in the past?
Been very hesitant at different times during this conflict to impose new financial restrictions. Anytime there's really a sign that Russia might be moving towards a negotiating table, they would typically back off. So seeing the president put his support behind these sanctions, this bill, it could factor into Russian decision-making, but I think it's going to come down to Russia's ability to procure what it needs to keep really its war industry going, because this has come down to really a battle of ammunition stocks here, because that major strike we saw in Ukraine, in the capital overnight, that sadly is becoming the norm now as Russia really ramps up ballistic missile strikes, getting around Iran's air defenses, exposing the lack of ammunition it has for its Patriot system to defend its cities. And that lack of ammunition, of course, goes hand in hand with what we're seeing in the Middle East. There's just less to go around, and that's why we really can't see these conflicts in a vacuum. It's all connected.
Nancy, we've got about a minute left, and I just want to ask you for your read of what's happening in Ukraine when it comes to leadership there. President Zelensky shuffling his cabinet, Mikhail Fedorov being dismissed, the defense minister who is very popular among the population there. There have been protests as a result of that dismissal. What do we know about the motivations for that, and what's your read on why this happened now?
So there have been internal divisions between that ministry, and we're seeing them play out on a public stage. And this has been a problem that has plagued Zelensky's government, questions about governance and corruption. And we've seen at times that the leader has had to back down because of opposition about his form of governance and some of the key aides around them. And so we're seeing another manifestation of this that's playing out because of internal divisions about the future of the Ukrainian defense at a time that they're facing increased strain, resource strains, and at the same time seeing kind of battlefield gains that is leading to, I think, a reassertment within the ministry about where the country should be going, where its defenses should be going, and who should be in charge of sort of shaping its future. I think an internal battle is now playing out on the streets, and a reflection of an ongoing conflict that has plagued the Ukrainian government throughout the war, which is what governance looks like, what is acceptable, and what the Ukrainians want to see from their leadership.
Nancy Youseff of The Atlantic, thank you very much. Shannon Kingston of ABC News, thank you as well for your time on this Sunday. And Christina, I think it's such an interesting moment here in Ukraine right now as we see that new dependency on long-range drones really going after Russian cities, as you mentioned, tackling, I think, a lot of data centers is what Ukraine was hitting there most recently.
Having such a huge impact, and you had this Russian official come out after those last strikes saying you won't see another fire like this, and then sure enough, you're seeing other fires like this. So and this is something that's much harder to spin because people can see it with their own eyes.
Yes.
All right, it is a big week for big tech. Alphabet among those releasing second quarter earnings. We're going to talk about that after stocks plunge, chip stocks plunge on Friday. That is straight ahead on Bloomberg This Weekend. Stick with us. We will be right back.
Thanks for joining us live on Bloomberg This Week, and I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. Republican Representative Ralph Norman is making a run for South Carolina's open Senate seat after the death of Lindsey Graham. Now, the move will set up a potential primary contest with Graham's sister, Darlene, who has been endorsed by President Donald Trump. In an interview on Fox News on Saturday, Norman said he's not worried about it.
I respect that, but that doesn't deter my plans. I'm in this to win, Kayleigh. And we'll be successful with this because we got a great leader in President Trump, and we can get his agenda unlocked.
Other South Carolina Republicans considering a bid include Representative Nancy Mace and Russell Fry, as well as Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evette. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, he is responding to President Trump's criticism of Canada's wildfire response. The president took to Truth Social on Friday, threatening higher tariffs to deal with the cost of, quote, filthy, polluted air. Ford, well, he called the president's rhetoric unacceptable and suggested dropping lumber tariffs would help clear forests. Ford says Ontario has 191 active wildfires. And poor air quality not affecting today's World Cup finals when Argentina defended its title against Spain in New Jersey this afternoon. Argentina fans, well, they were celebrating in New York yesterday.
We're going to hopefully win. I don't want to say we're going to win until the game is finished, but go Argentina!
Yeah, you can't jinx it. You know, yesterday we had England defeated France 6-4 in Miami. England was up 4-0 before the half and then held off a strong comeback from France to win the third-place playoff match. David and Christina, we'll send it back to you.
Incredible match.
That
Did you
was
watch
a
that
lot.
one?
I
did see it.
I didn't, but that was a lot of scoring.
It was high scoring in a way that might appeal to you, I think. It was like,
I know, I should have watched it. I would have liked that.
Yeah, it's good. And Mbappe is now, I guess, the front runner for the title of having the most goals in the World Cup.
That is true. That is true.
That's pretty cool.
If you can't get the gold goal, that makes sense.
Okay.
It'd be a good consolation prize.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa. All right, we're going to get a major indicator this week of just how drastically AI spending is reshaping the tech industry following Friday's big sell-off.
Alphabet, IBM, Intel, and Tesla all reporting second quarter earnings in the coming days. With us now in studio from Washington, Nathan Hager, co-host of Bloomberg Daybreak, and Bailey Lipschultz with us as well, Bloomberg senior equities reporter. Nathan, great to see you.
Nice to be seen.
Nice to be seen. I love that.
For our radio audience, this is what I look like.
The grand reveal did not disappoint.
Yes.
Did not
How about
disappoint.
Nathan, just set the table for us here. There has been a lot of kind of anxiety and agita just about the AI spend. What are we going to learn this week in broad terms from these companies?
Well, I think one of the first things we're going to learn in terms of the CapEx is, I mean, obviously we've seen so much projection into how much these companies, these four major hyperscalers, are going to be spending over the next year, projecting something like, what, $725 billion. So when we hear from Google parent Alphabet on Wednesday, I think that for a lot of analysts is going to be the big focus on how they set the table for when we hear from Meta, Microsoft, Amazon a week from now.
It's a busy season. It's going to be a busy earnings season.
You guys can't leave, okay? You're just going to stay here through the earnings season. We're going to lock you down. All right, we had this Chinese startup, this AI startup, Moonshot. This started kind of all of this, but they are maybe eyeing a Hong Kong IPO after this big AI breakthrough.
It's crazy how fast life changes.
We just did this. How does that work? How big do we think it would be, and how realistic do you think that is?
They're closing a funding round right now at $30 billion,
Sure.
smaller relative to $1.75 trillion, which is what SpaceX went public at. I think we've been expecting DeepSeek, the other well-known Chinese AI company, is targeting an IPO in mainland China early next year. So it does seem like the kind of table has been set for these two companies to raise money, but kind of keeping in mind 30 billion private round, 70 billion private round, even if they raised large IPOs, and those would be big IPOs in a normal year, when you compare that to SpaceX's $86 billion IPO and you compare that to what we're expecting from Anthropic and OpenAI, it's kind of small potatoes. And again, it's also a very different market. It's the opposite, as Nathan was mentioning, it's an opposite market where you say, okay, Meta is Facebook, Meta, Google, Alphabet.
I do that all the time.
When you're expecting these big companies with big checks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bailey, somebody said something to me last week that stuck with me, and that is, with China, you've got a closed state that has a very open approach to AI, and here it's the opposite. You've got an open society, and yet these kind of closed-off companies that are doing all the pioneering work on AI. How does that manifest itself just in the way you see AI's development going forward here, and when you look at a company like Moonshot versus Anthropic or an OpenAI?
The argument, David, when you look even at the cost of tokens or the cost of performing kind of menial tasks, it's so cheap, and it becomes kind of this overarching debate between the US and China is there a race to the bottom? And kind of the pitch going back to that DeepSeek moment, a year and a half, 2 years ago, that was kind of an, oh wow, they're able to execute just as well, if not better, on a lot of tasks for a small fraction of the price. There's still a lot of uncertainty around what chips are actually performing these products, so you have to keep that in mind. But when you think about this potential future of AI, the debate here in New York, the debate probably in DC and around the world is, do you want companies like Bloomberg or others using Chinese models, or would you rather use an Anthropic or an OpenAI product? And I think that's a big debate. Is cheaper better if you're utilizing it for important tasks?
But Nathan, this goes to the other issue, which is, can you really monetize these products? And if you're competing with an open source format, this is like the big thing that people are whispering. What is the answer to that? I know we don't know, but also, why aren't you seeing that hesitancy or even that questioning really reflected in the enthusiasm for these massive IPOs?
And it certainly gets into the question of, why these hyperscalers are spending so much money, projecting so much. We saw just in the first quarter after Google reported then, I'm calling it Google, it's Alphabet. Alphabet projected something like 190 on the top side, $1 billion that they're going to spend in CapEx, a huge chunk of that $725 billion number. If on Wednesday we hear from Google that they're going to project it even higher, what does that mean in terms of, to your point, whether they should be going for something like a cheaper model? And then to the question about whether the government is involved in this, how much of the parameters can be sort of
it's also interesting to me because when you think about your iPhone, right? When you look at the development of these smartphones, at first you had a bunch of different competitors, and it was Apple that made it open source and made other developers able to access the code so that they could put apps, so they could put it on the phone, and that's the one that took off. And you would think that had been a proven business model, but go ahead, Bailey.
No, that just becomes the underlying debate, though, that we're seeing in this market right now is, are you better off overspending? Something Google and Meta have been vocal about. We'd rather overspend than underspend and lose. And to that point, the big question, 5 years from now, 3 years from now, 10 years from now, is this similar to Cisco building the internet? Is this going to lay the groundwork for companies to come in and make a lot of money? Because yes, you do have companies that were around in the dot-com bubble that fueled kind of this technological shift. But what does an OpenAI or an Anthropic look like, and what companies are we not even discussing now that are going to come out of these?
Well, it gets to the question, when I lost my train of thought, what I was thinking about whether China is potentially taking some of the technology that some of these American companies are building, whether the federal government wants to try to stop that as well, getting into the difficulties of regulating these Chinese models and having them potentially be stolen by from American companies.
Yes. Bailey, you've been living through the undulations in the chip sector last week, and we saw that sell off by the end of the week. What's the messaging from these chip companies in specific? It seems like there's kind of a relentless optimism to them.
It's fine. Everything's fine. It's a little meme with the guy. Everything's fine. Everything's fine.
And how are investors processing that? I mean, they say that there is demand, they're making strides to fulfill that demand, and yet
it pays to be optimistic. The big question comes back to, when does this chip bottleneck no longer exist? And David, I think the bigger thing to keep in mind when we look backwards to look forward, Taiwan Semi crushed their earnings report. They gave terrific guidance, and the stock was down tremendously, on top of falling 12% before the print. So this is an environment, as we would talk about on our desk, calling it price to perfection, where the bar is very high, and you're looking at a semiconductor index that's up over 100% still in the last 12 months after a 20% pullback. So Nathan and I were talking about this on Friday, and it's kind of a question of, okay, well, what does a good print look like that actually drives stocks?
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, Intel is up over 150% year to date, and if Intel is potentially getting some of the spend that IBM in their preliminary results was saying that we didn't catch, that some of this shifting spending was going to be going to chips and AI data servers, whether Intel can grab some of that. If it doesn't reach that high bar that's already priced into the stock at 157% plus, is there going to be potentially some profit taking?
I also wonder, as you look at these huge CapEx expenditures, when it comes to competing with China, that is a place that can do things very differently, especially when it comes to investment and with energy. How big is the price of energy going to start factoring into where people think they're going to pick winners and losers here?
I think it's already playing out. And we're looking at a market that's trying to, and has been spending the last few months thinking about what does, again, 2030 look like if we're already betting on the companies making these chips. Is it nuclear? Is it geothermal? How can we address the energy bottleneck? Because right now we're dealing with semiconductors being a bottleneck. Well, the next step will be, how do we actually address powering these
And China has really diversified its energy in a top-down way that we haven't really done here in the U.S. Yeah.
Bailey, I want to ask you about SpaceX, if I could pull an audible here. We have seen that stock really come down precipitously since the debut. I've been thinking of Newton's third law. I mean, what goes up must come down, I guess, and we're kind of seeing that in real terms here in the stock price. What explains that? A dose of realism on investors' part, that what they were sold at the beginning might not be coming to pass, or it's unlikely that it would be guaranteed to come to pass? What do you make of the sharp downturn that we've seen? I guess $1 trillion wiped off the market cap there in recent days.
No, if you look at the chart, it looks a lot like Cerebras, which went public a few weeks, month and a half before. And there's a lot of excitement around the IPO. People are on social media talking about it. Everyone
a lot
at
of
a
FOMO.
dinner
You
party.
don't want to miss out on it. Yeah.
When I was at my grandma-in-law's birthday party, everyone was like, should I buy the IPO? And I'm like,
wait, really?
I don't give investment advice.
Give
No,
advice. Bailey
100%.
Lipschultz does not give investment advice.
I do not give investment
that's right.
advice, but there was so much excitement. And then you kind of step back and say, we're in a market right now that we've seen a pullback. So if you're an investor and you're selling Micron or you're selling Intel, well, SpaceX gets a lot more difficult to justify a $1.75, $2 trillion valuation. So naturally, you'll take some chips off the table. We haven't seen a true fundamental change to the underlying thesis. Starship delay was small on the margin. You should see a typical pullback, but that's not really, shouldn't equate to a 35% pullback. The big question now is this a company that is going to deliver news flow between now and their first earnings report, sometime likely next month, and then an unlock of hundreds of billions of dollars of shares? No one knows what that looks like. So you have short sellers betting that the company will either, at least the stock price will continue to go down, and then you have just the uncertainty around the next Starship launch and uncertainty around what the earnings looks like on top of an unlock. There's a lot going on there.
Nathan, we've got about 30 seconds before we let you go. Intel, IBM earnings this week. What do we expect?
So IBM, as I said, mentioned that they were surprised or caught off guard by the shift over to chip and AI spending. The question for Intel is, do they draw in some of that spending as well and potentially overperform later on this week?
And IBM really punished for that.
Yeah,
over the last
down
week.
20. Since the Nixon administration,
wow.
we've seen a drop.
There you
1968.
go.
It's a lot of Nixoning in the
rare.
news
It's
recently.
rare for us to be able to say that. Not since the
third
Nixon
Nixon-related headline I've
did I
heard
miss
this
Nixon maxing?
Nixon
earlier?
maxing, that's
Yeah.
what I was referencing. Yeah. We will not be Nixon maxing here on set, but I do appreciate you both coming in on a Sunday, and happy World Cup Day.
Yes, happy World Cup Day. Again, that game's scheduled to start at 3 o'clock here in New York. You're going to be watching.
I promise
You're
I
not
will
going
watch
to go
this one.
there.
No,
Bailey, you're going to go?
To New Jersey?
I live in New Jersey, but I will not be going.
With binoculars on, watching the stadium unfold. Thanks to both of you, Bailey and Nathan, here with us on set in New York.
Thanks,
and will
guys.
it be back-to-back wins for Lionel Messi in Argentina? We're going to get a preview next from someone who knows the game. Real Madrid star Antonio Rüdiger joins us live in studio here on Bloomberg This Weekend. This is exciting news. I mean, this is like, he's a big deal.
We are very excited. We're
I mean,
trying to
big
play
deal
a
is
cool
an
week. I
understatement.
can see them in the green room where we're trying to. We're cool. It's fine. We talk to cool people like you all the time. We're not nervous at all. It's going to be great. No, but doing a lot of things and has a new foundation that he wants to talk to us about. So we'll talk about soccer and we'll talk about careers and what to do after those
Philanthropy
careers
as well.
Yeah,
Very
we'll
cool.
be here.
Coming up here on Bloomberg This Weekend on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television.
Thanks for joining us live on Bloomberg This Week, and I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. A Cuban dissident, an artist, has been freed by Havana after 5 years. Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara, he arrived in Miami in an unusual prisoner release by the island's authorities. Now, it comes as Cuba faces an economic pressure campaign by President Donald Trump's administration. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, well, he welcomed his arrival and asked for the immediate release of what he called, quote, more than 700 unjustly detained political prisoners held by the government in Havana. Influencer brothers Andrew and Tristan Tate, they have been arrested in Miami. Prosecutors in the UK, they're seeking their extradition on rape and sex trafficking allegations from 2010 to 2017 in an area of North London where they grew up. And the brothers are expected to appear in Miami federal court early next week. Their lawyers say they deny the allegations. The final round of the British Open is underway at the Royal Birkdale Golf Club in Southport, England. At the top of the leaderboard is Sam Burns at 10 under par. And a British runner has broken the 27-year-old world record for the men's mile. Josh Kerr, he finished the distance in 3 minutes, 42.66 seconds. Now, this happened at the Diamond League meet in London on Saturday. The previous record, well, it was of 3 minutes, 43.13 seconds. That was set back in Rome in 1999. Now, Kerr, he was wearing a super shoe by Brooks Running and a speed suit to actually balance aerodynamics and breathability in the heat. That time is incredible. David and Christina, I'm telling you, I think my mile is like 10 minutes. I don't even know.
Lisa, I was going to say, I definitely run on a good day like a 9-minute mile, but let's blame the shoes. We don't have fancy shoes. That's
True.
what it is.
There
That's
you
what it is. All right, thank you so much. We actually let David, for once, go get a cup of coffee because I'll tell you why in a minute. After a long, complicated, mostly joyful journey, the 2026 FIFA World Cup is finally here. Spain is going to be taking on Argentina as that team tries to be the first to win back-to-back World Cups, a feat not achieved since Brazil in 1958 and 1962. So to bring this all to a nice close, we let Gura go get a coffee, and we invited Bloomberg Business and Sports reporter host Randall Williams on the sofa here with me to help interview our next guest. We have Real Madrid and German national team center back Antonio Rüdiger. Thank you so much for coming in. We really appreciate this. Thank you for coming in.
Absolutely, I'm excited.
All right, boys, who's going to win this game?
Whew. Let's ask the professional first.
I think that's a tough question, and obviously, because I play in Spain, I'm going for Spain. But it's a tough match because Argentina is really, really a strong opponent, and but still, I root for Spain.
Fair enough.
So everyone who is analyzing this game say that Spain keeps the ball away, they don't allow you to have it, and that's how ultimately they could beat Argentina, is if they score first and then play keep away. From your perspective, what makes Spain a difficult opponent?
If you see the way how Spain played the whole tournament, they were always dominant. They played as a team, and they have also great individual quality with Lamine Yamal, and I think that's they have a great mix of team. But then you see Argentina they have Lionel Messi, and then they have the soldiers, and that makes them very dangerous.
How has this World Cup been overall? I mean, I know obviously Germany didn't go as far as I'm sure you would have liked, but you've been here, you've been playing, and even watching it, it was very controversial to start, the venue, but it feels like, I mean, people have called it a worldwide sleepover. The fans, the Americans, we've gotten along pretty well. And from a player's perspective, just how was it?
No, I find it very, very, very positive because you see a lot of different nations meet together, and the main focus is the World Cup and the joy in the people and all the emotions, and cultures are meeting together, and everyone supports, and this is just great.
How was your experience just being around the U.S. cities? One of the things that was unique was that you were traveling all throughout, back and forth to the base camp and then out to the matches themselves. What was your experience like as you were traveling and experiencing the different cultures in those cities?
For me personally, it was, first of all, we are there for a job. Like the traveling, that's part of it.
It's a work trip, yeah.
America is a huge country, so that's why we knew that before.
Yeah.
But just meeting the people around, because I like to have walks outside and just connect with the people. And the people been great. They've been great, because normally when you come to the US, you think like people will not recognize you or something like this, so you think you have more peace. But
not in America, sir. Not in America.
Not at all.
So
it's
you
all
did
super
get
fans.
recognized on the street.
Yes. But the approach, I like the approach. It's very respectful.
Really?
And this is really something very, very nice.
Any favorite moments? Favorite interactions?
Favorite interactions? Yeah, like. Not favorite, because they all been the same. Like it's more about the approach, the way people speak to you, like very friendly, always please and thank you, like very well educated.
Oh, that makes it. Thanks, fellow Americans. We appreciate that on behalf. You mentioned Messi. You've played, I think, 4 times in your career. What makes him stand out as a player? Is he worth the hype? Is he really as good as his reputation?
Well, I think we are all seeing it, and he's now. I don't want to say anything wrong, but I think he's now 39 years old.
He is 39.
So then you know that, and he's still delivering on the world stage. So I think we don't need to speak more.
Fair enough.
I want to go back a couple weeks when Flo Balogun, the U.S. striker, he was given a red card. Some say that red card shouldn't have been given out, but based on the rules, it should have. And we see President Trump get involved. He asked FIFA to review it. As you were watching all of that unfold, what was your perspective?
Well, it's difficult. It's a difficult topic, especially for the player, for the U.S. team. I think. I wouldn't say that is the fault why they got eliminated, but I think that also plays a part.
Belgium came out with fire.
Especially for...
It had to be a hard head game, too.
No, definitely. So, but I think my personal opinion, he should have stayed out of that game.
If you were the coach, would you have played him or would you have kept him out?
If I would be the coach of USA, it's the talisman. It's one of the most important players in the squad. No, I would play him.
You would play him. All right. You mentioned the age, Messi's age. This World Cup, Bloomberg did an analysis, has more players in their mid and late 30s than any other World Cup. In 2026, 6% of the 48 national team squads were players on or around 40. 8 of the 20 oldest ever players to play in the World Cup match took the field in 2026. You're still a young guy, but career longevity in sports is hard. Is this encouraging? How are people achieving that? And is that something you think about on a day-to-day basis when you're playing, is how long you can do this?
Absolutely, I'm thinking about it. But first of all, we all always hoping and praying that we stay healthy.
Yeah.
And but with the amount of games we have, it's not always easy. So that's why, I'm now in my 30s. So I'm 33. So I'm also looking at always sleeping well, doing the right things. Yeah, to be at this highest level, because the young guns, they're coming out. There's always new talents. So the competition is huge, so that's why we have to look out for. But as the statistics say, we old men doing a good job.
All right, well, we only have a couple minutes left, and I know you want to get to your foundation, because as you look at, maybe not after soccer, but in concurrent with and just life outside of football, what is your foundation and what does it do? And I know you guys have a big event coming up.
Yes, as you mentioned, my foundation, I think this is my biggest drive. And there's when I want to leave my legacy, my personal legacy. And my foundation is about young kids in Sierra Leone. And it's about health, education, and sports development. And this is that's why also I have my foundation gala in Washington, D.C. on the 21st of July.
We think our tickets got lost in the mail, but we hope it's going to be a good party.
Oh, it's going to definitely be a good fundraising gala and then a good party.
Okay, perfect.
Yes. Last one from me. FIFA President Gianni Infantino, he's thinking about expanding the tournament from 48 to 64 teams. I wonder what your perspective. I think this tournament, we saw more matches that I wouldn't say are meaningless, but don't have a whole lot of weight.
We've only got 45 more seconds. Saved by the bell. Saved by the bell. Expansion, good or bad?
Bad.
Okay, there we go. Thank you so much for coming in. I encourage everyone to go to the website, take a look at the website of the foundation and what you guys are trying to do, and I know you're going to do more of that coming up.
Thank you very much.
All right, coming up next on our end, inside the multi-million-dollar market for dinosaurs. We'll be right back. If you're headed out the door, take us with you. Bloomberg This Weekend. We'll return in just a moment.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm David Gura with Christina Ruffini. And dinosaur skeletons have recently become a hot new asset class coveted by the ultra-rich. They're seen as an alternative to traditionally owning a piece of art or a sports franchise.
But with a market that's not yet stable or regulated, problems tend to occur. Bloomberg Wealth reporter Devin Pendleton for The Big Take investigated the recent failed auction of the dinosaur Shaheen.
Shannon was a T.Rex that the auction house Christie's announced in 2022, and it was going to be the first T.Rex ever to go on sale in Asia. This was poised to be a major sale. Shannon's auction never went forward. About 10 days before the scheduled auction date, Christie's pulled the sale. There are fewer than 50 known T.Rex specimens in the world. So the sudden appearance of Shannon, out of the blue seeming, was a little fishy to a lot of people in the paleontology community, which is small. People know each other, they know the specimens, they know what's coming to market. So this raised some eyebrows. Peter Larson is a commercial paleontologist, and he's sort of a famous figure in the paleontology world. He is a T-Rex expert, and he actually led the team that excavated Stan. Larson is a controversial figure. In the 1990s, he served 18 months in federal prison for customs violations related to a fossil discovery. Now, when he saw the announcement, he just instantly felt this jolt of recognition. He knew Shen, or at least he knew Shen's skull. When he discovered Stan, he made cast copies of all of Stan's bones. And that's a big part of his business, is selling these cast copies. He can sell them to museums, can sell them to private collectors. Basically, he sells these bones so that somebody can have a copy of Stan that's a bone-by-bone reconstruction without actually having the real bones of Stan. Ultimately, Christie's did pull Shen from auction. In a statement, Christie said that when questions are raised about a lot that it cannot answer in a timely fashion, the auction house withdraws the lot for further research.
Devin Pendleton is here with us, Bloomberg News wealth reporter. There's so much to unpack here. Literally and rhetorically. It's shocking to me how big of a market this has become so quickly. I remember I first read about this maybe less than a year ago, and it seems like it's only gone up. I was reading in your article, financier Ken Griffin spent $44.6 million on a Stegosaurus. Leonardo DiCaprio, Nick Cage, other celebrities have also gotten into these. But when one is purchasing a giant dinosaur skeleton, how do you know if it's authentic or not? What are you looking for? Because it sounds like there are a lot of copies out there potentially.
There could be potential copies out there. You want to make sure, of course, what you're buying, what you're spending millions of dollars on is authentic. And so there's a lot of paperwork behind that you're going to really need to ask for. And by paperwork, you want to know exactly where the dinosaur was found. You want to know the coordinates. And really importantly, you want to see video and photo documentation from the minute a spade was put in the dirt to kind of take this thing out, because there's funny business that can happen between when the bones come out of the ground and between when they're reconstructed as a specimen that you buy, and you need to be able to track all of it.
That's so funny. It's like a provenance for works in the art world, but this time it's you want to see the whole process of this thing being excavated.
Exactly, and provenance is the very word that they use.
Really? All right, well, look at that. I knew a thing. I do want to ask you, where did this market come from? How big is it at this point, and do you expect it to grow?
So the market's really old. I mean, this goes back, of course, since dinosaurs were discovered in the Gilded Age. There's great, colorful stories about Gilded Age barons kind of fighting over finding dinosaurs and laying claim to finding great dinosaurs and funding digs. So it's not new, but certainly it's taken on new velocity in recent years, you could definitely say. I mean, even in recent months, even, it's, who knows where it could go. I mean, this really is sort of, we're kind of at the very beginning of this market as sort of a mature, like, real sort of investable part of the market space, where you see auctions houses really getting into it and putting money behind it and muscle and entire shows and auctions dedicated to this space. Like there's a lot of potential. It has a lot of, buyers and sellers, traders, dealers, pretty excited.
Is there any kind of regulation? I mean, you talk about commercial fossil brokers in your piece. I didn't know that was a thing. Who is keeping track of where these are coming from, how many of them are? And as you mentioned in the piece, like sometimes you can recognize that that's a skull that you've excavated or that you own because you were telling me they have very unique qualities and scars or marks, and they can be identified.
Certainly, especially if you're talking about the skulls. I mean,
especially with the T.Rex, right?
Yeah, they're very big, and they've had incredibly violent lifestyles. So you're going to see marks from disease. You'll see holes that are signs of healed wounds. You might even see gashes, things that look like bite marks. I mean, you're going to see a lot more trauma there than you would like on a human skeleton. And it's not just knowing that you recognize that skull, but there's just not that many of them because there's so few that are really so that you could put together to be back in one piece, that they're just singular. And they've given them names too, which really also just, clicks it into your head like, oh, that's Stan. I know that skull.
We've got about 30 seconds left, but why is this a market? What is so compelling about these remnants from the past, and especially the T-Rex? What is it about these creatures that people are just so drawn to?
I mean, it's such a just part of consciousness. Like since we were little, they fascinate everybody. There's really nobody who I've come across in the years working on this story that's not like, dang, that's cool. It's just something very primal in us that finds this fascinating. And the T-Rex is amazing. As someone put it to me, it can just eat you in one bite. There's not a lot of things out there that can do that, and they're just cool.
I have to say, if I had gobs of disposable income, this might be on my list.
You'd buy a dinosaur?
If I had a giant foyer and needed something to put in it, like this.
I mean, there'd be a giant foyer to those who are watching here in the States, but...
Either way, whatever you're going to call it, I want a Stegosaurus in it, all right?
Sure. I mean, she's talking about the magnetism of these. If you go to the Natural History Museum here, it is crazy to see them.
They're just incredible, but it's also shocking that they can replicate them so well now. You can only tell with a CT scan if it's real or not.
The bones. All right. We're coming up on 9 o'clock here in New York City.
The next hour of Bloomberg This Weekend starts right now.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend, live from New York with David Gura, Christina Ruffini, and Lisa Mateo. The latest headlines, key analysis, big interviews, and the stories that hit home on your days off.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend, coming to you live from Bloomberg's world headquarters here in New York City. I'm David Gura.
I'm Christina Ruffini. We're here with Lisa Mateo. It is Sunday, July 19th, and we're going to get straight to our first guest because we have breaking news this morning. 2 American troops are dead, and 1 is missing after Iran struck a base in Jordan. The U.S. launched counterattacks overnight to, quote, swiftly punish Tehran.
16 American service members have now died in this conflict. We are joined by Congressman Marlin Stutzman, Republican of Indiana. He represents the 3rd District and sits on the Financial Services and Budget Committees. Congressman, thank you very much for being here. And I just want to get your sense, first of all, of the state of play here and your sense of the administration's strategy going forward in this war. We've seen the president effectively rip up that memo of understanding. The ceasefire is off, and we've had 7 straight nights of tit-for-tat strikes. Where do you see this heading?
Yeah, Christina, David, good morning. Great to be with you both. We're going to continue to see this sort of behavior, apparently, by the Iranians. We thought that the MOU was a good step forward. We know that the Iranians are challenging and difficult to work with. They're zealots. They are true believers. They've obviously killed over 1,000 Americans in the last 40 years. They've been at war with us. And now President Trump has finally said enough is enough. And especially with the threat of a nuclear bomb, that's the steps that we have taken. And I think they're the right steps. In this case, it's tough because the IRGC is still in control in Tehran. But how do you flush that out? How do you have a regime change? I believe there has to be a regime change because until this regime is gone, we're going to continue to see this. They know their power comes from their ability to sell oil and gas through the Strait of Hormuz. And that's why the struggle over the strait is so important. And that's why we have to win it. So there is going to be this back and forth. But I think President Trump, it's going to be more of a slow burn where you just keep economic pressure on and you keep military pressure on. And hopefully something breaks on the inside.
Do you think that needs to be reemphasized as a goal? It's a little bit unclear what the goals are at this time, but at the onset of this conflict, the president said he did want regime change in Iran. He's backed off that a little bit and said so much of the leadership was taken out. The guys who are there are a little easier to deal with. That seems clearly for the Americans to be not the case. Should regime change be the stated goal of this new wave of this conflict?
Well, I think it should be. But again, when you're sitting at the table with negotiators, you hope that there's somebody at lower levels of rank that are starting to move up because the upper echelon of the regime have been toppled, killed, and taken out. And so you hope somebody is going to use some sort of common sense and say, you know what, maybe we should adjust here and hopefully we can save the IRGC and they can somehow save their control in Iran. But again, like I said, they're zealots. They are willing to die for their beliefs. These are a very different sort of, religious fanatics. They are not giving up control very easily, apparently. But somebody on that inside of the IRGC needs to start saying, look, we can survive here and keep control. And President Trump is willing to do that. I prefer to see a complete regime change and a new government and let the Iranian people have their country back. But that's why this economic pressure, military pressure, hopefully causes someone to break inside and start to think rationally rather than continuing to fight. I mean, attacking Jordan shows the Middle East and shows the world that their problem is not just with Israel or with America. They're willing to attack Bahrain, Jordan, UAE, and other countries in the Middle East as well.
Sitting with them at the table, I want to stick with that point if I could, because we're hearing from Iranian leadership that they have no appetite to go back to the table now. They're saying that the U.S. walked away from this memo of understanding, which I know you praised it at the beginning. And they say, why would we go back? Why would we want to have talks with the U.S.? As you look down that path, the diplomatic path, how foreclosed does it seem to you? What's going to get these two parties back to the table?
Well, again, the reason that the MOU was broken because they were attacking ships in the Strait of Hormuz, and the Iranians. I mean, I tell you, President Trump gives these guys more chances than what they deserve, because he wants to find a solution here. He wants to find a Strait of Hormuz that's safe for commerce. It's good for China for their energy supply. It's good for Europe. It's good for the United States. It's good for everybody. In fact, it's good for Iran if they would just realize it. That if they had a safe strait where ships could go in and out, they would have the ability to sell more oil and gas. So in the long run, what's going to happen here, David, is that buyers of oil and gas are starting to look elsewhere, which actually benefits the United States because they want to buy a safe place for their buyers. And so the sellers are starting to say, look, we're going to go somewhere else and buy rather than buying from the Persian Gulf because it's too risky. So in the long run, this economic pressure, I think, is what's going to really hurt the Iranians. And it'll benefit other countries like the United States. And so the pressure needs to continue to be put on there. President Trump, I think he would always negotiate with them if they're willing to do it in good faith.
To that end, about economic pressure, President Trump, Truth Social, I'm not sure that's a verb, but that's what we're going with this morning. Truth Social this morning, Republicans should add Iran to the Russian sanction bill. That's what Lindsay wanted to do, and it was going to happen. Important, President Trump. Is that something you think should happen? Would that compromise the passage of that Russian sanctions bill if Iran was added to it?
Well, I think we should. As Congress, we should take that action, knowing that the IRGC has broken the MOU and that they are the ones that continue to fire rockets and weapons at allies and others in the Middle East. They have shown that they are going to attack ships in the Strait. They're still at war. And until they sit down at the table and say, we're going to act like a realistic adult country here and try to find a path forward, I think that we need to continue to put that pressure on. And sanctions is one of those ways that Congress can act to do that.
Let me stick with kind of the financial services world. Of course, you're on the Financial Services Committee, and there was this kind of extraordinary piece in the Wall Street Journal this week about your colleague from Florida, Anna Paulina Luna, looking at the prediction markets. And it sounds like she tipped off one of her friends or associates that President Trump was going to pick J.D. Vance to be his running mate. Said friend placed a bet as a result of that, made a wager as a result of that. And I guess there were some regrets on one of their parts that the bet wasn't larger. But I want to ask a broader question about this. This is kind of a moment at which we're looking at this kind of new financial marketplace, and there are a lot of questions about what limits should be placed, particularly on members of government, people in Washington in particular. And I'm curious, are you in favor of more rigorous standards or more rigorous rules being applied to, yes, lawmakers, their staffs, members of the administration and government more broadly, as we've seen more and more bets being placed on, yes, movements in politics and issues of national security as well?
Yeah, David, the prediction markets, obviously being more new to all of us, are ones that are going to have to have some sort of regulation. Of course, we have a lot of ethics rules already that we abide by. And in this case, insider information, I think should be treated as insider information. And so, whether it's, with a publicly traded company that currently has insider information rules, I think those same rules should apply. I mean, we know that Martha Stewart was, of course, convicted of that. And so there's obviously ways that process can work through a judicial process. And so as prediction markets become more popular and obviously these sorts of things happen, whether it's a streaker at the Super Bowl, I think worst case scenario, they don't get their the return on the bet if they knew what they were going to make happen was them and they were the ones manipulating the market. I think that's how we need to look at it. That's a manipulation to the market, and that it is a violation of some sort of rules that we probably already have in the books. We just need to make it applicable to the prediction markets.
So before we let you go, I want to know if you have any health updates on Mitch McConnell, if you believe the photos put out of him are genuine, and if you have concerns about whether he's able to do his job.
I do have concerns that he can really do his job, especially at a very difficult time when every vote counts in the Senate. And whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, we were obviously very critical of President Joe Biden when he had health issues, and we had concerns as the president of the United States. I mean, this is probably the oldest senator in the United States Senate that isn't able to perform his duties, and he needs at least to just be transparent. Let people know that he is not able to be, in the office. He's got health concerns. We earn the public trust when we run for office. And I think that matters even when we have health issues that, we just at least need to be transparent and let the public know. I know the governor of Kentucky has been asking for updates. Senator Josh Hawley has been asking as well, and others. It seems that he's, alive and recovering, but, we have seen this decline in his health for the last couple of years. And so that's why it's of great concern.
All right, I know a lot of reporters, myself included, have been asking as well. Representative Marlin Stutzman from the great state of Indiana. We appreciate you taking the time this morning. Thank you so much,
Thank you
sir.
very much. All right, joining us now, Eric Martin, Bloomberg News State Department reporter, and Wendy Benjaminson, Bloomberg News senior Washington editor. Wendy, let me start with you on the news that we got overnight, the fact that these two service members have died. We were talking with Josh Wingrove, our colleague covering the White House, who's with the president in Bedminster, and it sounds like we've heard precious little from the president about that attack and the ramifications of it. Just get us up to speed here on sort of what the messaging has been, what the sense of strategy is from this administration when it comes to Iran.
Well, David, it doesn't seem like there is a clear strategy, and that could be a communications problem, which seems to be politically not a great moment for the administration. In every other war we've covered, when American service members die, there is a somber statement from the White House acknowledging their service, acknowledging their patriotism. There are phone calls to the parents, not only to be notified, but often the president himself will call the parents of the dead troops. I don't know about the private phone calls, but we have seen absolutely nothing from the White House about these American deaths, except more strikes. And as your previous guests, including Josh, have discussed, it's like, what is the end game here? They had the MOU, and that fell apart yesterday, and now there's just all these tit-for-tat strikes. So what is the next step? But the president only mentioned his quote-unquote sadness at the death of the troops when asked by News Nation in a phone call. We have seen nothing from the White House in a broader sense. So that is very, very unusual and not great politically for Republicans, especially those MAGA Republicans who believed that they were, if they stuck with Trump, there would not be any more Americans dying in the Middle East.
Eric, I want to ask how this is impacting diplomatic facilities and diplomatic operations in the Middle East. We talked a little bit about it earlier, but throughout this whole process, this has been a very executive branch-led negotiation. We haven't seen a lot of State Department personnel, if any, involved in these talks. We've seen Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, the president, the vice president. How involved is the State Department in advising on these conflicts? And then what is the security situation at U.S. installations throughout the Middle East? Any escalation of that overnight or this morning?
Well, we've certainly seen Secretary of State Marco Rubio involved in the diplomacy here. He had a trip the end of June to the Gulf region, going to United Arab Emirates, to Kuwait, and to Bahrain, and meeting with his counterparts from the GCC in Bahrain, talking with them about the current state and the status of the Strait of Hormuz, about the concern among a lot of those allies who want to see freedom of navigation restored. Very important for them in terms of exports of their energy. We saw about 1/5 of the world's oil flowing through the strait before the war, and a lot of interest from countries and importance from countries in the region to get their oil flowing again, to get their economies back to normal. So we've seen a lot of engagement from Secretary Rubio on that side, even though he has not been the one at the table negotiating the memorandum of understanding that, of course, has been envoys Witkoff and Kushner and the vice president. But we've also heard from the secretary that he was in constant touch with them when they were in their in-person meeting in Pakistan back in April. But also just a lot of concern from all of these countries. We're seeing U.S. installations, U.S. bases that have been hit in a number of countries. In Jordan, obviously, on Friday, in Kuwait repeatedly, and these countries seeing their civilian infrastructure getting hit more frequently, seeing energy assets hit, desalination plants. And so concern from these countries, we've seen Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar all in the last 24 hours or so speaking out and denouncing these Iranian attacks on their civilian infrastructure. But this is how Iran has responded to an escalating U.S. attack and strikes against bridges, ports, rail, all of these kinds of assets.
Eric, I want to ask you about something I put to the congressman from the 3rd District in Indiana, something I put to Nancy Youseff, who was on the show a little earlier as well, which is where does this diplomatic track lead? Is there still a diplomatic track? And maybe you can put that kind of in a broader context when you look at this administration. So as Christina pointed out a moment ago, these are not talks that have been led by the State Department, to be sure. Yes, you have the Secretary's participation. But at this moment, when we see these strikes every night for more than a week, what is the general attitude toward the utility of diplomacy at this stage, as it seems like the war is escalating so much more?
Well, certainly if you listen to administration officials, they couch the escalation of attacks as designed not to be a new forever war or a multi-year war, as we saw with Iraq and Afghanistan earlier this century, but rather that they're using the escalation of strikes and the increased pressure on Iran, including on some of these assets that have both military and civilian use, that all of this is a pressure campaign designed to extract more from Iran in a diplomatic process. So we've seen the comments from Iranian officials over the last 48 hours or so about no longer being committed or no longer implementing the MOU. It's ironic in that would have been in these last several days basically the halfway point of the 60-day period that had been opened to build on the MOU and to try to get something closer to a final peace deal. So we're certainly seeing the MOU has been set aside, really by both sides at this point, but that it's not necessarily entirely, the process of diplomacy at least is not entirely dead, that the U.S. is looking at this as a way to extract more in a negotiation, while at the same time some Iranian officials we're seeing saying that because of the U.S. attacks on civilian infrastructure and the changing, evolving nature of the U.S. attacks, that they're not open to negotiations, and so dismissing that possibility. So I think we're going to have to watch in the weeks ahead what is the result of these attacks. Is this going back to something closer to what we saw in early March in terms of all-out war? We have not seen attacks at that level yet in terms of bombing of targets in Iran. Or is this something that's going to lead to a renewed push for diplomacy and renewed negotiation?
All right, Wendy Benjamin, she's our senior D.C. editor, and Eric Martin, he's our Bloomberg State Department reporter. Thank you both so much. I also think it's interesting, you heard the congressman refer to the Iranians as zealots and hardliners.
Yes.
It is harder. Their threshold for pain tends to be higher than the American public, who's going to question why we need to be there in the first place. And if this escalates, that might be something I think the administration might have to reckon with.
Certainly not a surprise, I would think, to this administration seeing that play out the way that it has.
Precisely. All right, coming up, we'll speak live with Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen, ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. We're going to get her take on the developments in Iran and the war in Ukraine.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. More escalation in the war with Iran, with Israel's military now saying Iran has launched missiles toward Jordan. It comes after the U.S. struck Iran for what Central Command called punishment after the Islamic Republic killed 2 American service members in Jordan on Friday. One is still missing. President Trump tells News Nation their death was, quote, a very sad thing, but reiterated that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. That's the war in Ukraine, where local authorities say 1 person was killed, 16 injured in an overnight Russian attack on Kyiv. Ukraine's foreign minister called it the largest ballistic missile barrage aimed at Kyiv since the start of the war. Well, back here in the U.S., hundreds gathered in downtown Portland, Maine to demand ICE agents leave the state after the killing of a Colombian national in nearby Biddeford. This man was part of the National Day of Action.
I was down at Biddeford, and I'm here because I care about that. And, who doesn't?
25-year-old Juan Sebastian Guerrero, he was killed in a traffic stop. It was the second use of deadly force by immigration enforcement in less than a week. Republican Representative Ralph Norman is making a run for South Carolina's open Senate seat after the death of Lindsey Graham. The move will set up a potential primary contest with Graham's sister Darlene, who took over the seat after her brother's passing. In an interview on Fox News on Saturday, Norman explained why he decided to run.
I will be laser focused on passing President Trump's America First, and it starts with the Save America Act. We'll nuke the filibuster, and I will be a vocal vote and a supporter to make this happen. And it's not happening in the Senate right now. That's why I'm doing it.
Other South Carolina Republicans considering a bid include Representative Nancy Mace and also Russell Fry, as well as Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evan as well. David and Christina, over to you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Hard-fought race there in a short period of time.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
All right, speaking of races, the 2020 election may seem like it's far off, but some Democrats are already weighing the possibility of running, though many are playing coy.
I spoke to former Obama Chief of Staff, former Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel at the Aspen Security Forum, and he used an ice cream analogy to talk about the 2028 field. We're going to talk about the political terrain, midterms, general election after that. But before we get there, I'm curious of how worried you are about this issue of election integrity. Seeing what the president has been doing, what his advisors have been saying publicly, how worried are you about the integrity of these next elections?
Well, I'm kind of right-left mind. One is I'm very focused on, I think, for Democrats, winning. What does it take to win? There is a part, less on the periphery, but at the other side, that, let's assume the Democrats win 7 seats net, get a majority. Every election, David, you have 3 or 4 seats that are 200, 300, less than 1%. Some states have automatic recount, others don't. The speaker showed that when it came to the Arizona race, he wouldn't seat the member. And I worry a little, and it's growing, that the January 6th that was on the steps of the Capitol will be driven inside the Capitol because the Constitution is very clear. The Speaker has the right to organizes the House. So you got to seat members to have a new election. And I think they're going to basically, until those elections are decided, say no. And they're going to say there's no majority, there's no clarity. And they're going to postpone actually beginning anew.
You've said you're thinking about running. You haven't made a decision yet. What are the factors that you're weighing? You've characterized this as a Baskin-Robbins primary in the Democratic Party. There'll be 31 flavors, and I'm curious if you're lining up to be one of them.
As I said, well, in 2024, the Democrats, unfortunately, didn't have a primary, didn't have a choice. I think that was bad for the party. And I think it's bad also for the electoral outcome. And the truth is we didn't really have one in 2020. I do believe in 2028, I said it's going to be like Baskin and Robbins and 31 flavors. And if I decide to do it, I plan on being Rocky Road.
I look at the travel that you've done, yes, to Israel, yes, to Europe to give a speech on NATO, but you've been to Mississippi, you've been to New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Talk about what we can draw from the places you visited, sort of what you're looking at here, again, perhaps in the interest of you running in the next election.
One is America faces a series of challenges. But everything that ails America can be answered by what's working in America.
So look inward, you say?
Yeah, well, I don't, by way of example, I don't believe, like I went to Mississippi where they're moved from 49th to 9th on reading. If you actually test for other things, they're number 1 in America. I don't need to go, by way of example, and look at Manchester, England. It's right here in Mississippi. I don't need to go overseas. It's working here. How do we scale it? I'm going to assume in New Hampshire, they have their own examples. In La Crosse, Wisconsin, I don't need to go to Luxembourg. La Crosse, Wisconsin's community college system and their high school system and their industry is an example of what's working in that integration of economic growth and educational opportunity. I will soon, after Labor Day, make a trip to Louisiana. They're the only states whose math and reading scores are now pre-COVID numbers. They have figured out the combination to the lock. Now, I passionately care about education. I cannot believe the country has become complacent where 50% of our kids can't read at grade level. There is no getting from here to there for that student if they cannot read, cannot do math, cannot not only graduate high school, but go into the armed forces, vocational ed, community colleges, or go on to a 4-year institution. So my view is I'm going to go down to Louisiana, learn what they have done. I read this report from both Stanford and Harvard and from a Tulane professor I talked to yesterday. And I want to highlight what Louisiana's done as every other 49 states are struggling. Our math and reading scores are anemic. And I don't think we as a country can give up on a single child in this country. Now, if you figured out the combination to the lock, I want to take Louisiana to all 49 states, and that's how we're going to reboot the Department of Education to actually do something for the future. Now, there is no getting from here to there, ever, when only a third of your citizens are reading and doing math at grade level. If you look at the 4 great moments of American economic growth, land-grant colleges, universal high school education, GI Bill, science and technology Sputnik challenge. The one through line and constant is when you invest in Americans, America wins. That's what I believe in.
Just a question about your party, the Democratic Party, going back to these 31 flavors. Do you see it as at all problematic that there is such I guess, debate or discord within the party right now when it comes to the issue of U.S.-Israel policy, when it comes to all of these issues? Is it productive, as you see it, to have conversations about policy?
Look, I grew up in a family where dinner table conversations represented the gladiators. So I'm for, I think one of the things, this is my analysis of the party. We come out of, and I'm as guilty as anybody else. In 2008, President Obama wins, and we were running around going, demographics is destiny, look at his coalition, the future's ours. Now, we became, in my view, as a party, intellectually flabby. And we're paying a price for that, both on the political grounds and the policy grounds, and ultimately not just us, but the country, because we're not kind of sharp and rigorous. So I happen to think a debate is way overdue. I think we should engage in a policy debate. Look, somebody else has another education idea that doesn't agree with mine. Great, game on, let's go. You agree, I said you serve 2 years national service, we'll give you the money for a down payment. You have another idea on how to solve that? Bring it forward. I believe, as I stated, a 10% tax on the prediction markets and online sport gaming goes into an innovation fund for the National Institute of Health, National Science Foundation, and the DARPA. Double our research dollars. You have another way to advance research and development? Bring it forward. Let's have this debate. We'll be a better party to better serve America's future. My view is that the party has spent too much time just focusing on fighting Trump. I want to prove to the country, the majority of America, we know how to fight for America, not just fight against Donald Trump.
Ambassador Rahm Emanuel, they were talking to me a couple of days ago at the Aspen Security Forum, and I think what was so fascinating about that conference, Christina, is how much what was happening in the Middle East and continues to happen in the Middle East is really animating the conversations that were taking place there. And so you hear from, obviously, a former senior diplomat, Rahm Emanuel, who was our ambassador to Japan, former ambassadors to NATO, and a lot of active policymakers as well, really tracking, of course, what's happening there and really noting the fact that this effort to get back to the diplomatic table incredibly difficult under these circumstances.
Well, we want to get someone else's take on that effort and where we think that's going. Joining us now is Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen. She's the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and co-chair of the Bipartisan NATO Observer Group. Senator, thank you so much for being with us. I first want to ask you what your take is on
to be with you.
The events. Thank you, sir. We have a bit of a delay. I apologize. I should have known that. The events overnight and the impact on U.S. force position in the Middle East, both our military and diplomatic installations.
Well, I think like all Americans, I offer my deepest condolences to the families of those service members who have been lost. Our men and women in the Middle East have performed in an outstanding way, and they will continue to do that. But what we need to do is to bring this war to a close and get the president to get Iran back to the negotiating table. He has not accomplished any of the goals that he set out for the war in the beginning, whether it's getting rid of Iran's nuclear program or changing the regime. We have a more hardline regime in place. We haven't dealt with the enriched uranium that's on site. We haven't destroyed their ballistic missile capability. And furthermore, Iran now is controlling the Strait of Hormuz. And that was never an issue before with respect to their nuclear program. They continue to support proxies across the Middle East. So now is the time to get them back to the table to address these issues, because it seems clear that while we are going to degrade their capability to finally address all of these issues is not going to be possible just by a bombing campaign.
You sit on the Foreign Relations Committee, the Armed Services Committee, and I hear you on your call to get Iran back to the table, but I wonder what route you see for doing that. You mentioned the president's goals here, what they were at the onset of this conflict. They have changed. There's been a plasticity to them over the course of this war so far. I wonder if it's clear to you what their objectives are and again, how you would get them back to the table.
When you say plasticity, I assume you mean they've gone back and forth.
Yes.
When you say plasticity, what we've seen is that the president announces different goals from day to day. The problem is there hasn't been a strategy for this war. We need a strategy. We need to figure out how we're going to get Iran back to the table so that we can actually negotiate. Unfortunately, the president is the one-page, two-page memorandum that he announced that was signed by Iran and the United States was open to vast interpretation, and it basically provided Iran everything they wanted, and yet they're still not satisfied. So we've got to come up with a different strategy, and so far the president hasn't shared that with Congress or the American public, how he's going to do that.
I wonder how concerned you are that Iran seems to be employing a different strategy now with its tactics, with attacking these bases. They have different munitions. They're barraging them with cheaper munitions before firing the ones that they can target better. And there's also reporting in the Wall Street Journal that perhaps they are getting targeting information and help from either China or Russia. I'm wondering if you have any insight into that intelligence and what you think about these tactics, if you're concerned about an escalation.
I don't have any insights beyond what's been publicly reported, but it does go to the point that we need to get Russia back. We need to address their war in Ukraine. We need to continue to degrade their capability, and that's what the Ukrainians are doing. We need to put pressure on Vladimir Putin. Now is the time. There is momentum on Ukraine's side, and if Ukraine can defeat Russia there, then that puts real pressure on them in the Middle East. We need to look at China. One of the things that we have just reintroduced this week is the Graham-Blumenthal sanctions bill that would target the top users of Russian oil and gas, and China is the #1 user. And if we can shut down their ability to access that cheap Russian oil and gas, that has a real impact on them, and it restricts their abilities in the Middle East.
Senator, let me ask you about that bill. So there's the debate in the Congress about it and what it should do, but the president has a lot of latitude here were it to be passed. He would choose to implement those tariffs, those secondary tariffs or not. And I'm very curious, sort of, as you've been a party to these conversations with the White House, with the U.S. Trade Representative, your sense of the eagerness or willingness of this administration, the president in particular, to impose those tariffs if, in fact, this is made law. We've seen the way that he has operated with regard to Russia in the past, the unwillingness to impose sanctions and tariffs like this previously. Do you think that he's at a point at which he would likely put those tariffs of 100% in place were he given the ability to do so?
Well, the momentum, as I said, is on the side of Ukraine. And the fact is, this is a very different bill than the bill that was originally introduced by Senators Graham and Blumenthal. It is much more narrowly crafted. It's aimed at the top 5 users of Russian oil and gas. It's aimed at the shadow fleet. We've already sanctioned the shadow fleet from Iran, and that's had a real impact on their ability to sell oil. So this would have a real impact on Russia. And what we know right now is that they're losing over 30,000 casualties a month. Their economy has taken a big hit. If we can really put pressure on Vladimir Putin, it's going to have an impact. That's what this bill is designed to do. And what we've seen it would be a fitting tribute to Senator Graham to be able to pass this. When we were in Ankara at the NATO summit last week, we heard from the White House that they were supportive of the legislation. The Treasury and the Trade Representative are both supportive. So this is the opportune time to get this bill passed. We have 62 sponsors in the Senate now, and we're still working on more. So let's get this done, and let's put pressure on Vladimir Putin and shut down his war machine.
Senator, a little less than an hour ago, the president posted on Truth Social that Republicans should add Iran to that sanctions bill. He says that's what Lindsey wanted to do and was going to happen. Important. I'm wondering if you had any inkling that the late Senator Graham wanted to expand that bill to include Iran, and if you think the inclusion of sanctions on Iran would either delay or compromise all that support you just mentioned.
Well, Senator Graham never raised the concern about it putting Iranian sanctions on the bill. The fact is we have significant sanctions on Iran. When the war started, we put additional sanctions on Iran. I think if the president wants to do that, let's do it in a separate bill. But this bill is moving. It's, as I said, it's targeted in a way that is important and comes on the heels of the G7 conference where everyone, including President Trump, signed on to a communique that said we need to support Ukraine and put more pressure on Putin. That was echoed at the NATO summit. We know that That's what it's going to take to get Vladimir Putin to the table. So far, we have not been successful at getting him to the negotiating table, and let's put more pressure on him to do that.
Senator, we're talking to you in London. As you mentioned, you were in Ankara for the NATO summit a few days ago. And I'm very curious to get your perspective on how Europeans are regarding the United States. I think everyone would say this was at least a relatively successful summit in the context of past NATO summits the president's been a participant in. But we have seen Europeans kind of react or comport themselves differently as the U.S. has begun to kind of disengage with some traditional aspects of their relationship with Europe. How do you see that relationship today? Are you worried about it? What's the path forward as you see it?
Well, as you pointed out, the NATO summit was very successful. Not only did we highlight the additional spending on defense, all 32 NATO countries are now at 2% of GDP, which had been an earlier goal. They're working their way up to 5% of GDP. We have a number of countries that I think 7 now that are over 3%. And so it was an opportunity both to highlight that and also to highlight the opportunities in our defense industrial base. We know that we're addressing threats from China in the Indo-Pacific, from Russia in Europe, from Iran, of course, and North Korea. We know we've got to work together with our allies and partners, and we've got to improve our defense industrial base in a way that allows us to work more collaborative together, to do co-production. And we focused on that at the NATO summit in a way that I think was really important. And we didn't hear from our European partners that they were concerned about the United States. What we heard was the importance of all of us working together, cooperating. I'm here in England with a bipartisan delegation from the Congress for the Farnborough Airshow. It's one of the biggest air shows in the world, and the American presence here is bigger than it's ever been in the past. And everyone's talking about how do we work together, how do we continue to innovate to keep America ahead of the competition when it comes to aerospace, which is so important to our future.
Senator, I'm assuming you didn't get that gift from Erdogan at the NATO summit that some of the other delegates got. I think we're calling it the Erdogan special. But assuming you didn't go home with any new weapons, I do know that you met with Ukraine's President Zelensky while you were there. It seems like this is a very pivotal time in that conflict, and there's also some tumult happening in Kyiv right now inside his government. What was your conversation with Zelensky like, and what is your take on what's going on with the leadership of the Defense Department in Ukraine right now?
Well, we talked at the NATO summit about what Ukraine's successes, about their drone production, their innovation when it comes to drones and how critical that's been to the conduct of this war. One of the people who has been very important in helping to change that direction when it comes to drone production and the new way of waging war has been their defense minister, Fedorov, who was dismissed by President Zelensky. Now, there are demonstrations. I think President Zelensky has said he's going to listen to what people have to say, and I hope he's going to be responsive to that.
I want to ask you about this period that we're in when you look at the Ukraine conflict, this 40-day period that the President Zelensky is really emphasizing additional strikes on Russia. We've seen him strike ships in the Strait of Azov as well. How do you view the kind of pivotal nature of this moment in that conflict? And the images that we saw yesterday from the president's Twitter account were really extraordinary, the strikes that Ukraine made on Russia. What does it tell you about the trajectory of the conflict and indeed what Ukraine needs at this point in terms of support?
Well, again, there's no doubt that momentum is on Ukraine's side right now. And that's why we need to be thinking about every avenue we can to support Ukraine. We saw tremendous support for Ukraine after the NATO summit, pledging billions of dollars in support. Looking at President Trump, said to President Zelensky, we agree you should be able to produce the Patriot missile and interceptors in Ukraine. That was a big step forward. And thinking about how we put pressure on Russia now and Vladimir Putin is really critical. And that's why this Russia sanctions bill that we have that would sanction their financial entities, their oligarchs, also look at those countries that are benefiting from that cheap Russian oil and gas and shut that down, because that shuts down the support for Russia's war machine. And that's what we need to do. Their economy is on the brink. It's teetering. The casualties that they're losing are just unbelievable from America's prospect. When you think about in less than 3 months, Russia's losing as many people on the battlefield as we lost throughout all of Vietnam. So now is the time for us to take action. I'm hoping Congress will do this, we'll get this bill passed, and think about all the other ways that we can try and bring Vladimir Putin to the table to end this war.
Senator, it does seem that this is at least moving towards a level of pressure that Putin really hasn't felt prior to this. But there is some concern with that, and that is if you corner someone, they're going to react. Are you concerned that a desperate Putin could do something really abhorrent, like the use of tactical nukes, and what can the U.S. or its allies do to try to prevent that?
Well, I think what Vladimir Putin is doing right now is already abhorrent. And the concern is that if he's successful in Ukraine, or even if not, the one place where he could escalate is against a NATO country. And that's why doing everything we can to bring him to the table is critical. Look, he's lost his foothold in South America with Venezuela. He's in danger of losing Cuba. He's lost his foothold in the Middle East, in Syria. Now is the time to add to that pressure to get him to the table.
Let me just ask you to look ahead, if you could, at the way in which you're going to get more answers to questions that you have about the administration's strategy going forward here. I'm curious what's front of mind for you, what you'd like to learn more about, and if indeed there has been any improvement in the ability of the committees on which you sit, again, Armed Services and Foreign Relations, in getting information about strategy from this administration.
Well, not that I'm aware of. We have a hearing before Appropriations on Tuesday afternoon where Secretary Hegseth and Secretary Rollins will come in for their supplemental budget request. We have very few details about what they're planning and what that would mean going forward for the war in Iran. We need to see that transparency. The fact is, in order to be successful, Congress and the administration should be working together. And the President and the Secretary Hegseth have not provided any of those details.
Senator, thank you very much. That's Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, of course, sits on the Foreign Relations, Armed Services, and Appropriations Committees, joining us today from London ahead of the Farnborough Airshow. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, we're going to go now to the latest headlines with Lisa Mateo.
You got it, guys. Lettuce recalls tied to a cyclosporiasis outbreak. It continues to spread, and now select Walmart locations. They have removed 4-bag lettuce salad products manufactured by Taylor Farms. The retailer said they pulled the items which are sold under its market-side store brand as a precaution. Now, there have been no confirmed illnesses tied to those products. Ontario Premier Doug Ford is firing back at the President Trump's criticism of Canada's wildfire response. The president took to Truth Social on Friday, threatening higher tariffs to deal with the cost of, quote, filthy, polluted air. Now, Ford called the president's rhetoric unacceptable and suggested dropping lumber tariffs would help clear forests. Ford said Ontario has 191 active wildfires. Poor air quality not affecting today's World Cup finals when Argentina defends its title against Spain in New Jersey this afternoon. Now, Argentina looking for its 4th title and they're battling Spain, who is going for their 2nd. And the match day is going to be attended by 80,000 spectators, including President Donald Trump. Another 50,000 fans will attend a free watch party on Central Park's Great Lawn. A host committee study shows the World Cup has produced $1.2 billion in direct economic impact during the group stage period. And FIFA, yes, also introducing a star-studded closing ceremony alongside a first-of-its-kind halftime show for the final. It'll feature Madonna, Shakira, Justin Bieber, and BTS.
Right.
David and Christina.
Global.
I'm excited for
in its
Shakira.
nature.
That's
Shakira,
what I'm looking for. Yes.
perennial
Shakira.
presence.
I follow the guy who makes her skirts online. They're very fringy, very fun.
All right, well, that's an interesting tidbit.
All right, this is going to be a hard pivot. All right, on a less fun topic now. All right, as we just talked about with Senator Shaheen, Russia hit Ukraine with the largest ballistic missile barrages so far in the 4-year-old war. Ukrainian President Zelensky says it involved more than 50 missiles and 120 attack drones, and now he's asking for more interceptors and more sanctions on Russia.
Comes after Ukraine struck in Russia yesterday. I spoke to President Trump's former Deputy Secretary of State at the Aspen Security Forum. Steve Biegun told me President Trump truly wants peace, but Vladimir Putin does not share that goal.
he sees war as a wasteful exercise. He also sees it as a failure of diplomacy, a failure of negotiation, very much in the context of how President Trump likes to approach global tensions like this. But he's got a bit of the conceit of the negotiator too, which is I think he believes everything is negotiable. In this case, it's just not the case. Putin doesn't want a negotiation. Putin wants Ukraine, and he wants all of it. American presidents, President Trump, and even to a greater extent President Biden before him, wake up every morning and think, how do I avoid a direct war with Russia? But Vladimir Putin wakes up every morning and thinks, how do I win a war against America? And I think that mismatch is very much on display. No matter how much President Trump wants a peaceful end to this war, Vladimir Putin's not going to give it to him because peace is not his objective.
It's a really interesting point. I think America for decades has failed to understand some of its foes' rationale and the ways of thinking, and Russia especially. We just don't seem to frame ideas and concepts in diplomacy the same way a lot of times. So that gets us in trouble.
Thinking as you were talking just about what a cornered Putin might do, Secretary Biegun expressing very similar concerns here about the irrationality of somebody backed into a corner in the way in which it seems like President Putin is, at least in small form.
100%, but it doesn't feel like he has any options. But that's always dangerous. It's also dangerous, power abhors a vacuum. If he ever goes, what replaces him?
Yeah, and I should say he echoing what the senator said just a moment ago, that he really feels like this war has changed its trajectory here in recent weeks, that Ukraine does have the upper hand going forward here. Up next, special Sunday edition of the Pointed News Quiz. We've got Lisa Mateo back in town. That means we're going to do it. We couldn't do it without her yesterday.
We avoided it yesterday, but truth comes for us all, and so does Pointed. So stick with us. Take us with you no matter where you go. Bloomberg TV, Bloomberg Radio, streaming, and of course the Bloomberg Business app. We'll be right back with Pointed. Stay tuned. You do the intro. I'm still
stacking your chips. It's time for Pointed, a special Sunday edition of Pointed. Lisa Mateo off yesterday, back here.
We missed you, Lisa. We had Alexis. She's great, but it is nice to see you.
Yes, and we would not, it would take a lot of training for somebody besides Lisa to run this game as fairly and efficiently as Lisa runs the game. Pointed.
Oh, goodness.
Of course, our weekly news quiz. Lisa, walk us through.
You were just hoping they would not do it.
Now it's fair. Now that he's been winning, you're running it fairly. When I was winning, there was controversy.
I saw it characterized in the trade press as an overwhelming victory for me last week.
What trade press?
Well,
text with your mom?
No, it's she freelances for the
I do see
press.
My family watches this very closely, and my father did congratulate you on your victory.
So thank you, Mr. Ruffini. I appreciate that.
It's
classy move.
Disloyal Ruffini.
No.
All right,
no
Lisa.
disloyalty and classiness.
They love Gura.
Yeah.
Okay, so for those of you who are not loyal and have not heard about
welcome to the show.
Here's how it goes. Here's how the game plays out. Okay, so they each have 30 chips in front of them, okay, into 3 different categories. They will place their bets depending on how confident you feel about each category, okay? So you're going to place your bets. They have whiteboards here. They're going to write their answers and reveal them. Our 3 categories.
What are they?
Are you ready for them?
I'm ready.
Okay, first is food.
Food, okay.
Second is smart homes.
Yeah,
and
interesting.
Third is credit cards. Okay, so think about it. How do you want to place your bets?
I don't know much about smart homes.
You don't?
That was my instinct as well.
I'm going to double up on credit cards, and I'm going to go nothing on smart homes.
Nothing on smart homes. Christina, what's your strategy?
I think I'm going to regret this, but I'm going to do the Ruffini split. We're going to do it.
Ruffini, 10 across the board.
Someday that'll collapse, but...
I mean, it has before. Let's see. Let's see how it goes.
All right.
Food.
We're going for food. Ready?
Yes.
You always do well on the food one.
Yes.
He does. Chipotle.
Yes.
Rolling its burritos into what country, opening its first location there on Thursday?
I did see this because I thought it was crazy.
Its burritos.
Oh, she's excited for this one.
I actually have no ideas.
Oh, you don't?
Have I mentioned I've been in the field all week?
What city?
No, we don't care.
Sorry.
I don't want to hear about Aspen anymore.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go with
Okay, flip it.
Japan.
Japan?
I thought it was Mexico.
Mexico is correct. Yes.
Because, they're strangers to burritos. I feel like they really need
I was
Chipotle's,
like, why, guys? Like
Taco Bell tried and it didn't work.
There was a reason for that.
Yeah, so they're going to try. They're saying their fresh ingredients are going to make a difference.
Interesting.
Okay, as someone from the Southwest,
I feel like Mexico knows a thing or two about burritos.
Exactly.
And it would be a hard
literally any gas station makes a better
into.
taco than I've ever had in the U.S. So, all right.
All right. I guess I need to think more logically.
You need to think more logically because now I have your chips, David Gura.
Yes, Christina's in the lead.
Diminishing returns.
Let's see what she knows about smart homes.
Smart homes. Let's
might
see
not
how
go as
smart
well.
you are in
Okay.
smart homes. OpenAI developing a physical manifestation of ChatGPT for the home. What kind of device is it? What is the name? What kind of device are they developing? This is OpenAI.
Yeah, I might know this one too.
A physical manifestation of ChatGPT for the home. What kind of device is it? I love our music. It's very soothing.
I don't know. I mean, it's like
you're erasing. He's erasing.
Yeah, but
all right.
I don't know. I was
time
going to
you
write like
erased, it was a
I know,
bad
and
move.
well, you helped me erase last time, which actually helped me. I wrote a pod, like a pod, like you talk to it, like the home pod, like you talk to it.
I wrote
It's
the
like a
same thing, like a
device,
speaker,
like a
like
home
an
device.
Alexa.
Well, since she wrote speaker,
Oh,
she is
for
correct.
God's sake.
It's called a smart speaker.
But you didn't bet anything on that one.
That's true. So I don't
Okay,
really care.
so you don't
I just
win.
wanted to.
I was
did you
actually going to defend you.
Did you see how I just naturally fought that, even though I had no skin in the game?
I was about to defend you, and then I realized you had no chips on it. So,
So it doesn't
I would have
matter.
argued
Okay.
you got that right.
Congratulations.
I was rough on you.
20
I'm sorry,
points for you.
David.
All right.
Okay.
All right. I'm
moving
gonna
on.
continue keeping all my chips over here. But you double stacked, so you can.
So
okay.
so we have Christina still in the lead. Okay, credit cards. We're moving on to credit cards.
Look,
But
I don't mean to point out errors in the control room, but I did see this question flash across the screen a moment ago.
oh, you did? Okay.
I didn't read
That's
it.
all right.
I just
You
want to assure
didn't-
everyone I didn't read it.
I didn't see it at all.
But I wish I had. It was there and then gone, and I thought, God, what an edge I could have gotten.
So close. So close.
Sometimes they put it in the wall behind us, and we're both too dumb to look, and the control room will be like, you know the answer.
No, it's been there. It's been on display.
I say that all the time.
I know. All
Okay,
right,
credit cards. Americans filed a record number of what last year? That's the term for petitioning a bank to reverse a credit card transaction.
Oh, yeah.
So what do you call that when you petition a bank to reverse a credit card transaction?
Yeah,
What is that called?
okay.
And there was a record number of them.
A
last
record
year.
number?
Record number. People want to get their money back.
Get that money back.
That's right. What do you got?
I think they're called chargebacks.
I wrote disputes.
Chargebacks it is.
Oh, for God's sake. I feel like it's a synonym. And fewer characters to boot.
Chargebacks.
I don't
Well,
know.
this is-
My desire to defend you on the one where you've bet a bunch is. He's not totally wrong. It is a dispute.
Dispute,
But
Come
no,
on,
but that's
no.
not what the answer
I'm
is.
sorry.
David
It's not
Gura.
I feel like she's done a 180.
I'm back.
What's
and I'm ready to go.
What's happened in the week between last week and this one?
First of all,
I
these
was
are
too comfortable.
randomly all topics I know, and I know about chargebacks because
Tell us
they're
why.
really
Yes.
hurting a lot of small makers that I follow. Complain all the time about them. They like vintage shops or people who sew things will send someone to something, and
Okay.
they will pay like $350 for a handmade jacket. And then the person will say it was bad and get the charge back. And the person who made it, it's very hard for them to get that
for
money
them
back.
to get the
Like
money.
the actual person, because the banks
Okay.
side with the customer, and these small like makers are they're losing a lot of money.
Okay, all right.
Go ahead.
It's not good.
Okay.
All right, I think we need a bonus.
We have one
because,
bonus. We have
yes,
what, a
you
limited
have to
time,
get
though.
back.
We gotta
limited
move.
time. Public health.
Public health.
Cyclospora belongs to what broader category of pathogen? And it shares the name with a 2019 film.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, he's like, yeah. I got this. I got this.
all right.
Let's see
We
if you
gotta
can
go
get your
fast.
chips
Okay,
back. Ready?
bad ones?
Parasite.
Parasite. Ding,
Oh,
ding. David
duh.
Gura.
Thank you. Oh,
I don't know
my
how
God.
much you
I get
get
all
back,
the chips
but we'll
back.
give you all the chips
Lisa
back.
Mateo, thank you very much.
It's a draw.
She redeems herself in the end.
Lisa Mateo.
I should
Wait
say
a
you can-
minute.
well, they fight this one out, and I relish
What is
this
the
win.
where's the
or
review
tie.
like they have at
It's
the
a
World
tie.
Cup?
It's
There's
a
no
tie.
VAR and pointed. You can test your knowledge on all 10 questions. Take the pointed news quiz at Bloomberg.com/pointed, and of course, it's available on the Bloomberg Business app.
Jack Hughes, thank you for joining us on Bloomberg this weekend. No thanks to my colleagues here. Please join colleagues I like better on our Asia evening
my
when
God.
global markets kick off trading 7 p.m. Eastern. I'm Christina Ruffini.
I'm David Gura with Lisa Mateo. See you next week.